I'd like to call the Committee of the Council as a whole to order. First item that we have on the agenda this evening is John M. DeLine, Deputy Commissioner of Wastewater of Water Supply, to approve increases in the minimum monthly charges, water usage rate, and miscellaneous charges described in Chapter 177, Article 6, Section 177-15 of the City Code. I'd like to conduct the meeting in the following order this evening. I know we have a long presentation. We also have members of the public who'd like to be here and speak this evening, and I know councilors will certainly have plenty of comments, questions, and deliberation. So I'd like to allow for John DeLine to take it away first, move through the presentation. I'd like to ask any questions from councilors to be directed specifically to the presentation for the time being. Following the conclusion of their presentation, I'd like to then ask members of the public and give them an opportunity to speak for 2 minutes or less, and then from that point, allow councilors to direct questions to Mr. DeLine and do any deliberation from that point. So, gentlemen, any questions or concerns from councilors before I move in that direction? Excellent. Oh, Jody.
I guess I would only ask that if there's going to be an interim question by the councilors, to make it a brief one so that we can hear from the people. I'd rather the audience not wait until 11 o'clock tonight, because I don't think that would be, I think it would be rude.
Councilor Joseph, I think that's a great point. So absolutely, please have it kind of very specific to the presentation, so that the presentation, so that can provide hopefully some clarification in answering the question, and then move back to the presentation. That said, gentlemen, if you could just introduce yourselves and feel free to take it away.
Sure. Good evening, councilors. It's a pleasure to see you all. Not a pleasure to be before you tonight because of the topic. It's not anything that anybody really wants to consider, but it's something that I feel needs to be done at this point. I'm going to begin off with a little introduction, and I have Mike Schrader from Ty and Bond, and actually I have another gentleman from Ty and Bond, Peter Valinsky. Mike will make the presentation that I forwarded to you, and we have a newer version based on comments, questions, and I'd asked you to follow along with that, and even that one has had a slide or two added to it. The water rate study was initiated last year while Dennis was still here, and basically the main reason for it was that the water department was using retained earnings to balance its budget, and we also wanted to look at creating some revenue to expand our capital improvement program, which is very much needed. I want to be clear is that when we were looking at these rates, we didn't just do it in an isolated bubble. We considered what wastewater's rates were, how affordable everything is in the city, and also with Unitil. It wasn't just we need to increase the rates and get more money. It wasn't that. We tried to take that all into consideration. So the increases that we're proposing are going to allow some, and we'll go through the presentation, you'll see that, but really marginal improvements in the water system. I think with the couple of emails that I sent you, you can see that we have quite a bit of old pipe in the city that needs to be replaced, but we're going to work on some of the worst areas first if this goes through, and then Mike will explain how we can identify other areas that will offer the most bang for the buck. One of the reasons we're before you is that the revenue from water rates has decreased over the years. In fact, 10 years ago, the city was using about 5.5 million gallons of water a day. So if we continued to that, or even that flow amount of water usage went up, we actually wouldn't be before you now. But in fact, we've gone from 5.5 million gallons a day down to 3.7 million gallons a day. That's what the city averages over the course of the year. In the heydays when mills were running, it was as much as 10 to 30 million gallons a day of water that was being used. Of course, during those days, the water department wasn't enterprise funded, and a lot of that money was used to support city services rather than going to improvements to the water system. So that's a huge drop, 5.5 million gallons a day down to 3.7 million gallons a day, which has really impacted revenue, and the reasons that retained earnings have had to be dipped into. I think some of you have seen some of the emails that I sent out with some of the pictures. Here's a tuberculated pipe here, and this actually, in some ways, this isn't too bad. It looks pretty bad, but there are city streets that are much worse than this. And we really need to step up the water main replacement and upgrade program, because these are slowly closing in all the time. Despite flushing, this tuberculation creeps in until eventually it's a small hole there that just keeps open by the flow from residents. And when a fire occurs, it doesn't clean out. When we flush it, it doesn't clean out. And particularly when there is a fire, there isn't enough flow to actually fight a fire adequately in some areas of the city at that point. So if we don't do work, in addition to tuberculation, eventually the cost of repairs. I think maybe you knew how many water main breaks we had last year. We've had a little bit of quiet period, which I'm sure is going to jinx us right now. But we've been kind of fortunate this winter with a mild winter without much frost that would cause stress on the pipes. But eventually those breaks and those type of repairs are going to overwhelm the water department and the personnel there. So one of the things that you think about is that city does have a lot of water. In fact, we're using less water than ever before, and it makes it appealing perhaps to perhaps someday being able to either sell the water to another community or maybe bring in a large water user. Great Wolf is one of our largest water users now, and we're happy to have them. Otherwise, things would be much worse as far as our revenues. But having said that, if we don't upgrade the water system and constantly maintain it and improve it, if all our pipes get down to something like this, and they won't all do that because the transmission mains stay open, they don't get quite as bad as this, but we won't be able to support new users. We won't be able to support new development. And I'm hoping that maybe someday in the city's future that will become an area where people can come to because of the water. I know some of the other cities and towns in the areas, they're on the edge of their supply. We're not. We have enough water. And if somebody's looking to have a bottling plant or something like that, that maybe we'd be able to track them. And with that said, I'm going to turn over to Mike Schrader, and he's going to go through the presentation. Again, the one that we handed out that has a staple in the upper left is the latest, includes all the newest slides. So,
latest up to an hour ago. There's, I think, one change. Thank you, John. My name is Mike Schrader. I work with Ty and Bond, and I'm a project manager on this project. I'm also the rate study guy, I guess you could say, for our water practice. So what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is a couple things. One is to inform you about the process, explain how we figure out water rates and how we take a look at it, and then to talk about the need for capital improvements, why we need them, and how we're going to pay for them, and how we're going to determine what to be made. So I just want to show you a little bit behind the scenes, what goes into this. The Water Commission has seen some of this, and this has evolved as we've gone. So when we talk about why the rates need to increase, it's like everything else. Costs go up, and you need to periodically adjust. Like hopefully our pay gets increased every once in a while to accommodate increasing expenses. So the last increase was 2011, which may seem recent, but it's really not. That was 5 years ago. And in that time, since 2011, the expenses to the water department have increased about 2% per year, which is what you would expect. Consumption has decreased by 6% per year, to John's point. So water conservation has been great. It's been a very successful movement in this country. But on the downside, most of the costs that the water department has are fixed costs. So it still costs you as much to run the water department. The amount that changes with the amount of water you produce isn't as much as the fixed expenses are. So the revenue, as a result, has been essentially flat, 0.2% increase. And in the meantime, they also received a notice of noncompliance from the Department of Environmental Protection, an NON as they call it. So they found 14 violations and 24 deficiencies and 21 recommendations. Now, it's not uncommon to see that kind of thing. This is not, it's stuff that needs to be addressed, but this is what they do. They go through and they look at their list. But this is one of the drivers behind the need to make changes. Speaking of drivers, so the drivers behind the rate increase is water quality. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, and I think a lot of people are familiar with that here. Capital improvements. Some of these capital improvements are required, And then some of them are required by the DEP by the order, and some of them are required just by age and condition. So you can think of a water infrastructure, I think of it like an old farmhouse. It's always, everything's sort of getting worse, and you're fixing things, and then the other things are getting worse as you go. And then the last part, and the harder part for me to write about John's department, was that the level of service is declining. So when we talk about level of service, it's to provide safe, aesthetically pleasing, affordable water to the people and have it ready 24/7. It's an on-demand. There's a readiness factor to it. And quite simply, when you have, in this case, so water quality can come from a number of places. It can come from source water. Most of New England is groundwater. Most of them are plagued with iron and manganese. You're lucky you have nice, good, quality water. You have well-protected aquifers. So even though we're going to talk about problems you have, there's problems you don't have too, and source water quality is not one of them. But where the water quality issues come from is the pipes. So when you have, this is a picture of a brand new water pipe, and this is actually in town. This is a city picture, rather. So you have good pipes, you have good water, and when you have bad pipes, I'm not going to call it bad water, but you get that, and that's what John's saying. And the piece here, they get a little more charming as they dry out. When you see them, wet in service, there's more to it than just the tuberculation. There's slime layers and growth and stuff like that. It's very hard to keep something clean that has that many nooks and crannies. So anyway, one of the things I like to do is people don't realize, you take it for granted because it's buried infrastructure, so you don't really realize how much there is to it and how much infrastructure they have. But the water department or the city has 10 reservoirs, 13 dams, 4 pressure zones, which means they have to regulate pressure so they don't damage people's plumbing systems, 11,000 services, and 187 miles of water main. And John reminded it's really more like 190, but I had already made the slide. So you think about that, try to put that in context, 187 miles of water main. You're driving around the city, it's hard to picture that. So laid end to end, that would reach Canada. So I think it's kind of interesting to think that that's how much water main you have. And 43 of those 187 miles are more than 90 years old, which until itself, as we're going to talk about, isn't necessarily a problem, but it's just something to be aware of. You have a lot of old infrastructure, like many mature New England communities. And then 55 miles of that have a risk of failure of greater than 50%. So that's something to be aware of too. So now just to go to the rate-making objectives, when we talk about rates, it's really 2 numbers. They're the numbers you need to run to run the operation, and then there's how you're going to spread that amongst the users. And one of the things that Fitchburg has going for it is that it has a lot of users. So 11,000 is good. It spreads the expense out over a lot of people. The economy of scale works very much to your favor. But really what we want to do is develop a sustainable financial model. So that means we're not, and when I first met with Dennis, Pete here had told me we're going up for a meeting, and I looked online. I looked at the reports and the capital and the stuff that you have on your website, and immediately I knew why they needed it, because they were transferring from retained earnings every year, and that's the problem, because you're not sustaining the money coming in is not equal to the money going out. So when we want a substantial financial model, we want one that's going to maintain itself. I won't say perpetuity, but for the foreseeable or the projected future. And when we look at that, what we need to cover are the costs associated with operating expenses. So there's, like we said, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of costs that go into that. I'll show you some of those. The debt service, okay, that you got to pay your bills, you got to pay the bank, and depending on the notes that you have, the bank wants to see that you have enough money coming in to pay your bills. They have coverage ratios. Infrastructure repair and replacement, we need to maintain that as a cost. Otherwise, you're just spending your depreciation for, I don't know who's financial guys in the room, but that's, if you're not replenishing that, if you're not investing in your utilities, you're basically just spending that money and then you have nothing. And then it's based upon repeating revenues. So we want to see where that money's going to come from. And one of the slides I had says, rate revenue, non-rate revenue, donations, and gifts. It's always on the slide, but nobody, we wish we had donations, but some lucky people do. And you want to maintain sufficient reserves. That's always that could be an issue for a lot of, let's say, water guys, because people say, well, you got this big pot of money. But they also have big infrastructure. So if a dam fails, which is an easy one here because you have 11 dams, you need to spend money fast, you need to fix it. So you need to maintain a certain amount of reserves to be able to operate, and also to dampen against unforeseen things, to stabilize. It really helps, much like the water tanks help stabilize the pressure, they help stabilize your finances. And then, why we're here today, the process is transparent, it's defendable, and it's informed. So we take a look at a lot of numbers, and we make careful decisions. And at the end, the rates are fair and equitable. Fitchburg uses a standard rate, or one rate across all user classes, so you don't really have an equity issue. It's very straightforward. It's a very equitable rate structure. So when we talk about usage or consumption, as they call it in the water industry, usage is your primary source of revenue. Okay, so they talk about the water meters as sort of being the cash register of the utility. So every time that meter spins is going to be money that the city's going to make on that. And that usage, or that consumption, if you think about it, is really, it's a socio-economic thing. If people use more water in the summer, they use less water in the winter. And, we look at whether population trends, is it, going up, is it going down, are people moving in, moving out, how many new starts are there? Conservation, it's been a steady decline for over 10 years. We're kind of hoping it's going to start to, it's got to, but you see some places now, you see the waterless urinals and you see composting toilets. There's been a trend towards less water use, and that impacts your revenue. So when we look at, a big part of the rate study process is projection. So you look at past expenditures, you look at past revenues, and we think about the future. What do we think the future is going to hold? What should we carry for assumptions? And when I look at revenue, to project your revenue, one, I always want to be conservative because you just never know. But when I look at consumption, when I project the revenue, rather, I want to look at the consumption. So we did that in Fitchburg. So this is from 2009 to 2015. And what we see is about a 2% decline across the axis here, and just showing that water use has gone down. So we just need to think about that and project that, because that's what's going to keep happening. And then I also wanted to see, I like to see if there's a response to precipitation. Now, at Fitchburg, I didn't expect it because it's a large, the bigger you are, the more less homogeneous you are, I guess. There's enough different uses and urbanized areas and things like that where you don't expect a high demand versus a smaller coastal community or a bedroom community where everybody waters the lawn and washes a car on Saturday. So I took a look at that, and I compared the precipitation to consumption, and we can talk about, sorry about that, we can talk about little jumps like this, and yes, but to make it a better interpretation of that, I looked at just the summer months, and I plotted, I won't bore you with the plot, but I plotted precipitation against consumption in just the summer months. And I just wanted to see, so just real quick, here we have an inch of precipitation and 158 million gallons. Then way over here we have the same number with a lot of precipitation. Make a long story short, I didn't see a correlation. So that means your water use is pretty stable regardless of precipitation, because otherwise, it's you have to look for up years and down years and things like that. So that's good. A lot of guys, this may seem like an odd thing to talk about, but John can tell you that a lot of guys in the industry, they get a wet summer, they don't have money because nobody watered the grass, and they really see a hit in revenue. So that's one thing we really don't have to worry about too much here. So I also wanted to talk about, we're talking about, the cash goes in, the money that goes out. I want to talk about, where does your money come from, or where does your revenue come from? And most of it, as you can see, is by consumption, the amount of water that people use. The rest of it is by fees, and it really doesn't matter. You can, manipulate it so more is from fee and less is from consumption. At the end of the day, you establish how much rate revenue you need, and then we talk about how to distribute it to the people. And so the bulk of your money is coming from your customers directly in their water bills. Non-rate revenue are service charges, connection fees, and there's the grants and donations. I don't think you had any donations last year, but theoretically it's possible. So those are the sources of revenue. That's what we look at coming in. And when we look at the historic revenue, what I like to do, I don't like to use blanket numbers for escalators for things. I like to take a look at each line item and understand, what are the highs, what are the lows, and what are the trends. I look at the trends for each set of data, and I'll talk about it, and then I come in and I sat down with John and we went through them all, like, why did this go up so much? Why did that drop down so much? And he says, well, that was a one-time thing, and blah, blah, blah. So we go through. The important thing is, and this isn't, the rest would kind of curl down onto the floor, but we do look at every single number, and then we make a educated guess or a projection as to what it's going to do going forward, and we use that to project the revenues going forward. And again, we try to be conservative because it's just the right way to be. Now, on the expenses side, similarly, we've got these expenses are just broken down. So the way the water department runs, they break down their personnel expenses, distribution, and regional water. And then we've got the city reimbursement for indirect charges, debt service, and capital. And what you see is that about half of it is the city reimbursement and debt service. It accounts for about half the expenses. So right off the top, he's paying, half of the money that comes in, when they're equal, is to pay for these two things. So when we think about, talking about other communities and other water systems, it's important to know, well, what is their debt service? So if you have a community that hasn't built a new treatment plant like Fitchburg did 10 years ago, their debt service might be lower, so it's going to look like they're more flush with cash.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yep.
But one point I'd like to make is about that debt service. That was for the treatment plants and the storage tanks that were constructed. I mean, we're still paying for that, but I consider it capital because those improvements, I mean, yes, the US EPA mandated it, that the sources be filtered, but the bottom line is that if we didn't filter those sources, I can guarantee you that the water quality would be much worse than it is now. So this is money that went to building the treatment plants, building the storage tanks, and when we go to borrow money next year for doing water main work or this year, that will be part of the debt service too. But again, that's going toward capital. So.
Am I going at the right speed? Faster, slower? Okay. All right, and then only 4% goes to capital. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So same thing with the expenses. Go through every line, and again, there's 3 screens more down below. And it's really just to see trends. What happened? Why is this going to go down? Why is it going to go up? Do the same thing. We analyze them and say, well, geez, look at that. There's a big jump here. Why did that go up so much? And that's a small item. And we talk about, well, what do we think is a good projection for doing that? And that's what we apply to the future. So we've taken our revenue projections and our expense projections, and really the difference is what we call required revenue. Well, how much do we need to get from rates? So this is what we came up with based on that is a rate increase, and I think you've all seen this a number of times. It's a 17% increase going forward, and then an 8%, a 5%, and nothing is projected for 2020. And you may wonder why do we do that? Why not go, even, or why not go for higher ones? It's one of the things that's important to remember, just simple math, is that when you make that jump here, this 8% is building off the previous one. So it's a small, you're getting more because you're leveraging off of that. You know what I mean? If you go up 17% this year, if you did it in reverse, you don't get as much bang for the buck because you start the line higher and then you go in smaller increments. We'll get it done in the future years.
Okay, if I.
Oh, yeah, I think I.
And when we looked at these rates, one of the things we considered was senior citizens. A lot of them really try to keep under the 2 units of water that they use per month. A lot of communities are going to a higher minimum charge because they know that the 11,000 services times $20 minimum charge a month, they're guaranteed that revenue. We didn't really want to go that way. It would be a big change to what has been done in the past, but it also would have impacted senior citizens and single person households that really try to stick under that amount. So we did take that into consideration. There is still an increase, but many communities, like I said, are bumping up that minimum much higher to make sure that they get that revenue each year, no matter how much water anybody uses.
And it's probably worth talking about here if people aren't familiar with the way water rates are structured, is the monthly charge, and you can do it almost any way you want. I've seen a variety of ones. This is more in keeping with the AWWA, the American Water Works Association, recommendations, where they charge based on meter size. And you might think, well, why does that matter? And it matters from a number of perspectives. Is that bigger users, there's also a readiness to serve charge that is sort of rolled in there. That a 5/8 inch meter, we pretty much know maximum on a Saturday what you can get out of that. But if you had a 6-inch meter, you can get a lot of water. So we maintain a system that's bigger than necessary to provide for those bigger users as well. So this is, like I said, a common practice where you have equivalent meters and you multiply the base charge. So it's $6 for a monthly charge for a residential, but it's $270 if you had an 8-inch meter. And that just is also sort of the scale that the small people are paying a more reasonable rate. So the comparison to other communities, do you want to talk to this one? Because this is your baby.
Sure. Originally, Ty and Bond had an annual.
John, if I could stop you for one moment, we have a brief question. Councilor
Sorry,
Green.
I hate to interrupt the presentation, but going back down to the proposed rate slide, when you talked about 5/8 meters and 6-inch meters, do you have the breakdown on who those either like how many residential are at the 5/8 versus how many commercial are at the 4, 5, or 6-inch meter?
Yes, I do.
Okay, would you be kind enough to share those? Is that a number that you have?
I have it on my computer.
Okay.
I don't have it off the
mean,
top of my head.
At some point, I would like to know like
Okay.
where we're at with.
Just a simple thing is though that all residential meters fall in the 5/8 to 1-inch meter. 6-inch meters, we have, I would say, less than 10 of those in the city. The majority, and we have no 8-inch meters, 8-inch services. The majority are 2 and under. A few small commercial ones. And that's the other thing that we looked at is like how does it impact businesses, someplace like Great Wolf. Now they're going to absorb the same increase for using water, but with respect to their minimum charge on their meters, it pales in comparison to what it's based on, how much they use. So it's not a big impact in percentage on those large users. It boils down to how much water they use is where their expenses come in, not on the minimum charge.
Yes, and Fitchburg maintains one rate across all users, so they don't charge more for different classes of users, so that helps.
For just Great Wolf, for example, they have 2 4-inch meters. They have some other smaller ones, but they have 2 4-inch meters, so their minimum charge will go from $73.60 up to $97.67 so per month.
Not a big.
$24 over the course of the year, so times 12. It's their actual water usage where the money comes from them.
And just to dial back here, you can see it right there. Only 12% of the revenue is coming from those fees. The rest comes from consumption. So there's
Thank you.
still. Okay, so we looked at.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead. This is your.
All right.
Your side.
So they had a yearly expense. I thought it was better because everybody receives their bills on a monthly basis. I wanted to make a comparison based on a monthly basis. That way, you'd really understand what the impact was. So we can compare it to other area communities. I could have got, many more, but as you can see that, right now with our current rates, we're in, only Clinton is less than us for an average family of 4. And that's 75 gallons per person today, so 4 people would use 300 gallons. That's probably on the high end. I wanted to be conservative because I wanted you to see what the worst impact is. Now, if somebody has a leak that they're not aware of, a leaking toilet, a dripping faucet or something like that, their bill is going to be considerably higher. But we find that some families of 4 are very conservative, so you won't see as much of an increase. They actually use much less than 75 gallons per person a day. It's more like, 50 or so.
So it's like a worst case.
Right. And I wanted to do that just to show you what the greatest impact would be. So even with the rate increase, the final one in 2018, it would go from $37 up to $49. So it would be $12 a month more. And again, that's a worst case, unless a worst case is really if you have a leak that you don't know about. But a family of four that is conservative, it'll be less of a difference than that, so.
Council Kennedy, you have a
For
question?
single, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Council Caddy?
That was gonna be one of my questions, so I'd like to ask it now while you've got
Sure.
that on the board.
Yeah.
What the difference was going to be between today's rate and 2018. So
Right.
today's rate would be the 3703,
Right.
no, that's 2011.
Well, that's the last rate change, but that's what the current rate would be.
So, and then in 2018, thank you, that's better. I can see better. So the difference in 2018 is gonna be 4909
Yeah, about $12,
About
about 12,
$12
six
increase.
months a month.
over in 3 years, it'll be a 12
Right.
a month increase.
Right. And with that, that still puts us below, we're gonna be above Leominster at that point. You can see Leominster's 44.95, but in speaking with Leominster, they're actually looking at a rate increase that would be similar to ours, maybe not quite. At first it was smaller, but now it's gonna be bigger perhaps, but they're really watching us.
That's a huge
Quite
point,
closely.
though, because you look at this last rate change, it's kind of like looking at gas prices. So you look and you see, wow, Leominster, they haven't changed rates since 2012, so that means they're probably due for one. And I mean, I can't speak to them, but John has. And the same thing here, 212, 210, 2010, their expenses have, unless they really set an ambitious or a long-reaching goal, they're probably ready to raise rates. So it's kind of false to compare them direct. The other thing is that, like John said, 75, if I recall, your per gallon per capita was more in the low 60s.
Yeah, it's much lower than that, but again, that's what,
Right.
you know.
But just to a point, that's one of the things that DEP looks at is your gallons per day per capita, and they have a threshold of 65 that they want people to be under, and you guys are even under that. Again, which speaks to your multi-faceted nature of the city. You don't have just a lot of single-track homes using a lot of water. The multifamilies and all that help drive that number down, so that looks favorable. So
If it's a family of four with two teenagers that are showering all the time and spend a lot of time, I hear that's a common complaint to us. My teenagers spending all our money on water, but it's quite a bit difference between that and somebody with younger kids who don't want to bathe. That,
Right.
I don't want to take a shower, and and that's where you see the range. So somebody with teenagers will probably be at that, or maybe even higher. Somebody without will be in the low range. So, and again, being conservative, people can save and not have that much of a increase. So.
for a single
Council Caddy,
person,
you still have the floor. Did you have any further
I'm
questions?
sorry.
Gentlemen, I'm just going to pause for one moment. Council Joseph also had a question.
I'm confused by the number. How did you get that number of 37? Is that an actual? I mean,
That-
my bill right now with two people in my house is $50 a month.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't know how four people are going to
That
be.
with water and wastewater, or
Yeah, water and wastewater. So
this
how's-
is just water.
Okay, so how's that?
I don't have the. You're using less than you would normally. I mean, what two people would use with water and wastewater if you combine the bills. This is only water. All right, but yeah, if your bill's $50 a month and it's water, that's water and wastewater combined, you're doing pretty good. So.
All right.
So when you get, that's an important point, though, when you get your bill, it's a combined bill, because we can't measure wastewater easily, so we use the water use as a proxy to estimate how much wastewater use, or the sewer department does. And that's you see them both on one number, but that's an excellent point, that it's, your water bill is probably considerably less than that, because the sewer rate is 7, I think, compared to 3, so it's more than twice. No,
So
no
out of
problem.
that $50, probably
question.
$18 to $20 is water. The rest is wastewater. Just pulling out the quick estimate out of my head. So
Council
this is for a single was there another question?
Sorry, yeah, we have one more question.
Sure.
So if I'm looking at that, 300 gallons per day, 9,000 gallons a month, is that correct? So if I'm looking at the
Yeah,
math,
that-
you're
that's right.
talking
Yep.
622, right? 622 a month, 74.64 a year, and then in 2018 it's going to go 1106 a month more, or 132.72 per year, if I did my math correctly.
That sounds about right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the numbers, and so a gallon of water right now is basically .00411444.
Right.
Okay,
Right now, you get 750 gallons for $3.16. In 2018, you'll get 750 gallons of water for $4.20. So for $4.20, you get 750 gallons of water,
okay, thank you.
the highest rate, so. Like I said, these are, just to be clear, this is just water. I didn't put that in because I really wanted to compare, seeing what it's costing us to provide water versus other communities. And you can see that, that we are lower than, and even with the new rates, that we're still going to be below the majority. And as Mike pointed out, a couple of those, haven't had rates increases in a little while. So in fact, their costs have gone up. And speaking with them when we're researching this, that they're expecting rate increases in the near future. So we're going to remain competitive with other communities. And it goes beyond just the constituents and the customers here. Is that one of the things I was looking at is that we want to have rates that are favorable just in case somebody like Leominster or Shirley or Lunenburg desires, and we've had discussions to connect in the water. We want to make sure that we have the ability to supply to them. So, and have, rates that they can make it work.
Are we good on this?
This is a single person, just 75 gallons per day. And you can see that even with the rate increases, it stays lower. And again, this main reason for this was to make sure that the elderly were protected. And they're still going to see an increase, but we didn't want to hit them harder by increasing that minimum charge per month.
You'd have to work at it to use 75 gallons too. I don't think my
Yeah, most elderly are
is that much.
under 40 gallons per person per day.
Okay, so now we've sort of talked about, why we need to spend the money, or why we need to raise, I should say, the revenue. Now we want to talk a little bit about capital improvements and, essentially where the money's going to go. And then we'll talk about how we're going to decide what to do. So when we look at historically, the capital improvement plans, the ideal scenario is you have the rate model and the capital plan go together because you're planning for your increases, and you also do some strategizing around debt retirement and things like that. And historically, I think, John, you described it well, sort of just being a wish list. Well, we had one, but if it's not built into your model, you don't really have one because you're not funding it. And when I did this, there's a couple of things that really impressed me about Fitchburg as far as its management goes. One is that the city finance office or the treasurer's office had a very detailed fixed asset inventory that was very helpful. And these are the depreciated values, so they're not replacement costs, they're not present day costs, but it's just gives you an idea. You have $34.6 million worth of treatment facilities, 1.4, I'm just going to cruise here. Storage tanks, meter reading equipment and vehicles, water mains. So there's $56 million worth of depreciated assets just sort of sitting in the ground. And it just gives you a size of the enterprise. Like the concept of the enterprise fund system is that you run it like a business. So all the revenue comes in, all the expenses, you pay for yourself. So when you think about it, in terms of like how much money a year or whatever, it's a $56 million enterprise. And those are book values, not original replacement costs.
I estimate that the worth, the present day, if you were to replace everything in the water system, water mains, storage tanks, reservoirs, dams, probably the replacement value right now in today's dollars is about $300 million.
So we'll just talk real brief. I'm not going to drag you through a lot of detailed curves, but the concept of this is, it's not a very optimistic concept, but it's basically that everything that you install, as soon as you install it, is starting to decay and starting to wear. So a lot of communities would look and say, well, we have a brand new water plant. And when we start talking about, well, it's actually more than 10 years old, a lot of the equipment in that plant is halfway through its serviceable life. And that's just the way it goes. Things wear out, they break. I mean, you still have the buildings and stuff, but everything fails. So what we look at here is, as time goes on, that asset, which is an asset is any part of your system, a pipe, a pump, a building, they start to go down in a decay curve. And what we decide is where do we maintain it? Where does the level of service start to trail off that you start to notice it? Some assets you can run to failure because they're easily replaced and they're on the shelf. Other ones need to be managed because they're expensive and they can cost a lot of money to replace them. So again, I think this is really interesting. You may not. When I first started in engineering when I was young, we would look at things as age. Okay, they replace oldest first and newest last, and you kind of go through it like that. And as the whole industry has matured and there's been more data collected over the last 20, 25 years, what we really found is that the way pipes fail and the reasons they fail, it's not just age. It's the age, it's when they were manufactured and the type of material they are. So just briefly, we look at cast iron, okay, which is this pipe right here. So the highest failure rate is green. That's 41 to 60 years old. And this one here is 80 plus. So there's a 100-year-old pipe has less than half the failure rate for a 40-year-old pipe. And that's because, this is where it gets interesting, because it was World War II. They were taking a lot of the resources to fight the war, so I don't know if they were using cheaper iron or what, but so these are the considerations we make. We don't just say, well, we'll replace all the 1880s pipes. Well, sometimes those pipes are really thick and in good shape, and we can rehabilitate them instead. So just taking a look at this, and this is not, I mean, this is real thumbnail from a large study that was done by Utah State, but just applying those failure rates to yours, 72% of your system is cast iron, is unlined cast iron like that. So that has its issues. And then looking by age, this is your age of your pipe. So you have 115,000 feet of pipe are more than 100 years old, 100 and something are 100 years old, 90. Big bump in 70 years old, so that 70 years was the baby boom. So that was when, the boys came home from World War II, we started building, we started investing, there was a lot of pipe installed. Looking at it from a risk of failure, so I took the cohorts, because the data was pretty detailed, I was able to look and assign those failure risks to those types of pipe, because I knew where they were and how old they were. So we have 55% failure rate is 160,000, and 60% failure rate is over 100,000 feet of pipe in the ground that could fail. And then looking at that, to John's point, I used our replacement values for those pipes, for just those pipes that are greater than 60% or 50% failure, and it's about $68 million total. Now that's not, this is not doomsday. We have ways to manage and how to approach this, but it just gives you an idea of the sort of what's out there, what's up against. So when we talk about pipe failure, it's not like a wine glass breaking, it just failed. Sometimes they just break and he fixes them, and he breaks and they fix them again. So they can break. They can structural break, and that can be caused by overpressurization, corrosion, severe weather conditions, settlement, etc. They can fail hydraulically. So when we measure and we talk about flow, this pipe has a certain amount of flow it can get through it, and we calculate that, and we use the roughness of the interior as a measure of that. So new pipe's very smooth and get a lot of water through it. This pipe, not only is it rough, so I think it's sort of intuitive. You think about something that's rougher has more friction. It's not going to be as conducive to flow of water. But then also you just get section loss. So we've lost that diameter. So you can have a hydraulic failure, which is this C factor is what it's called, is the smoothness of the pipe. So there's significant loss in there. This pipe new is like 120. That one there is like 40. So we can actually measure that in our model. So what happens is when you try to pull a large amount of water through that, you just can't go through it. It's similar to what asthmatics have when they can't breathe. They can't breathe is because they're constricted. It's the same thing. So when you call for a fire and they open up that hydrant and it's shooting 4 feet away, it's because that pipe just can't deliver the water. Okay? And then water quality failure, which is when you're really thinking asset management, is you're thinking about things not just of failing, but of failing to meet their level of service. So you think about it, if you were going to sweep, the stuff that comes in there when it first comes in is dusty. Like it's in the water, but it has a dust-like nature to it. If you try to sweep this out, it's very easy. It's clean. It's like sweeping your garage floor. If it's got all these nooks and crannies, it's hard to get that stuff out, and it makes it hard to maintain them. And then slime layer, there's no other word for it. There's a slime layer that grows there too, and it can be hard, and especially the big diameter mains. It's hard to get enough water moving to really flush them out. So when we talk about non-structural failure, so these pipes, I'm sure had high break histories associated with them, but when we look at this pipe and that pipe right there could still be in service and not broken. And these, unfortunately, You know, some communities won't even let me show these pictures. They're like, no, you don't want to see it. These are the insides of water pipes from Fitchburg, and they're a little hard to see. That one always comes out dark, but you can see there's very little remaining of that section. That's pretty well tuberculated. That's what we're up against. That's what happens. So we asked about, the gentleman asked me before if this was a steel or a iron pipe. Really, mechanically or structurally, the steel is stronger, so it's thinner. But really, the biggest difference is when they make this pipe, you can actually see it in here. That's a cement lining in there, and that prevents that tuberculation from happening. It was just something that, as the industry evolved, they realized that they needed to start adding that because of this problem. So.
Just going to ask you to pause for one moment. Mayor Di Natale?
Mr. Schrader, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but there's no health issues with this. Is that correct?
That's correct. So
Can we reinforce that fact, please?
Yeah. And that's why I'm so hesitant to call it dirty water, bad water. The water industry is heavily regulated. And so, John, you take samples at your sources and throughout the distribution system. They do regular sampling for coliform bacteria, for a litany of constituents. And so when we talk about that stuff growing in there, it's not harmful bacteria. The water's safe. However, in the case of that, it just may not be pleasant. So, usually it's as much aesthetics. There is growing concern over elevated iron and manganese levels in waters, but this is a more of a quality of life issue. The water is safe to drink, and
We actually perform more than 10,000 tests a year on the water in the city of Fitchburg, and if there was any violation or if we exceeded any level, we'd be required to notify the public immediately. So, and you haven't had that happen. I know they had a bacteria a couple of years ago, but that's been it. So.
Well, I'm not minimizing the appearance of that.
It's an excellent point that
and
we're not the only water system dealing with this. This isn't a Fitchburg issue,
Right.
Or
Right.
It's
Thank
every
you.
city in the country, and you're going to see it more and more be coming to a head because a lot of these water mains that when Mike said that 90% are 40 something miles are 90 years or older, that tuberculated water main. This water main that was unlined had a 50-year lifespan, and now it's 100 to 120 years old. So we're more than double the lifespan. The new water main that's lined with cement, this has a 100-year lifespan. In fact, will last 100 years unless you have some unusual corrosion in the soils that could affect it. So the good thing is that the stuff that's being in place, and in fact, it probably will last more than 100 years. There will be isolated areas where we do have, some type of corrosion, strake, electrical currents or something like that that could cause a main failure of this. But this pipe here is much stronger than the cast iron. This can actually move a little bit and flex. Cast iron, if I did have a small hammer and just tap this, it would crack. This you could slam with a sledgehammer and it'd probably just bend a little bit. So the stuff that we're installing, we also use plastic in some instances too, which is also has good longevity. Is going to give a lot longer life than this, and that's one of the things I pointed out. I mean, how many things can you build nowadays? I mean, it's kind of like roads. I mean, you pave them, 20 years later they need to be paved again. With these, we're talking over 100 years of service, which I think is unbelievable, really. So,
Council Green, question?
I just also want to point out, Mr. Mayor, this is Fitchburg water. I filled it up in the lavatory before. It even tastes good.
We're happy to supply that for you.
you got to take it off the bill.
Yeah.
Right, you would drink that water, but you wouldn't drink the water that we just got an email picture from that. I thought the glass of water was orange juice, to be honest. And I mean, I know that we've got. Right. I
So
know,
you'll have the opportunity for public comment in a moment.
right. So again, when we talk about issues like this and the impacts of the water quality that we may or may not be in control of, but I think that, you should prepare yourself to hear some angry comments from residents who for months and or years have dealt with water that you wouldn't drink,
Right.
I wouldn't bathe with, I wouldn't wash my clothes in. So
But as far as having bacteria that are harmful to you, it wouldn't be. But it's not going to taste good. I mean,
You can have
it's
water
not. It's
that-
not going to make you clean because there's that iron and stuff in it, so we agree 100%. And that's why we're before you, is, to try to generate some, additional revenue so we can do some replacements.
Thank
So
you.
when you talk about sort of water quality, it starts with the water source. So I'm working with another community that they have worse issues, believe it or not, in their collection system. But theirs is coming from their source water. So they have to build an $8 million treatment plant to treat their source water. Here you're starting with clean water. We're just running it through, I don't want to say dirty pipes, old pipes. And that's what's causing the problem. So you're already ahead of the game with your filter plants. Now we just need to clean up the distribution system so they can stay clean and maintain that. So
And if I could just add to that, Fitchburg, spent a lot of money over the last, one of the things they did a lot of protection of the watersheds. There's a lot of land that's owned in there. And what we're seeing, US EPA is requiring additional testing all the time, what they call unregulated contaminants, to see whether they should be regulating them because they could be a potential carcinogen or have other health effect. And through that testing that we've been doing, which EPA mandates and Mass DEP mandates we do, we haven't been seeing that. Some communities have, and we've actually had questions about that. It's because our source water is so well protected. And not only is it well protected, it goes through filter plants, and it's very clean as any. And last summer, Mass DEP actually, Department of Fisheries and Wildlife did a survey out at Mare Meadow, our largest water supply reservoir, just to see, whether we had invasive plant species, the water quality, and they said that was one of the most pristine water sources that they've seen in the state. So that goes to tell you how good the water is going into the pipes, and then this is what happens.
So talk about fixing it, and how the water department's planning on that. This picture right here is I'll go through this quickly, but there's just two considerations. So if this water pipe here, you can be from the 1880s, if it's the right size hydraulically, so we're talking about a water model in a few minutes, but if it's the right size to deliver what you need, you can rehabilitate it. They actually will go in and dig trenches every 500 feet or so, replace the hydrants and the valves, and they mechanically clean the pipes out and install a cement lining in there. And I tell you that I've seen 1880s pipe, it's fine. Stuff is it's that thick, it's strong, it can be rehabilitated, and you get another 100 years out of it. So if it's not the right size, then you replace it. So you look at it, not in its current condition, but back to this condition, that pipe still may be too small, right? The city's grown up around it, no longer meets fire protection codes. So then we would look at replacing it. But we do look at that, there's a variety of ways to get back to a good condition.
Councilor Gaddy, you had a question?
Yeah, what size are our main pipes coming through the city? Are they 6, 8?
4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 20, 24. And coming down from the regional plant, we have some 30-inch main. So it's quite a variety. The areas that are more developed will have larger diameter mains to support fire protection systems. As you get out into the fringes of the system, the water main diameters go down. The minimum standard nowadays is for water main that's for fire protection. Is that this is a 6-inch main? It is a 8-inch main is the minimum in an area where you need to have hydrants connected to it. The minimum size on a side street where there isn't a hydrant or something like that, it would be 3 inches. So.
Councilor Hay?
Let's follow up again.
You're talking about replacing and fixing. Do we have an indication of the number of pipes or the length of pipes that will be replaced as opposed to fixed?
It's a great question. We're going to get to that in a
Of course it was.
second.
I
Talk
asked it.
about how we're going to do that. This is the
We'll answer in a minute.
yeah, and I'll come back to that. So when we look at those increasing those water rates, those 17, 18, 5, and 5, what we're looking at is, and John and I worked through a number of scenarios here, but we looked at the retained earnings, which is the reserves, and we looked at how much additional revenue would come in, and the goal was to maintain reserves at $500,000. That's just standby cash. And then we looked at how much we could spend, or he could spend, on capital improvements. So some years it's more, some years it's less, depending on the changes. But the goal was to target starting up at 350, then going up to 500, 760, and 693 to fund capital improvements. And now how that actually happens, whether that's just rate funded, like pay as you go, or whether it's used to pay debt service if they decide to, bond a.
And I could interject when you're done.
Okay, go ahead.
You done?
I'm done.
All right. As you can see, I mean, looking at the bottom line, it's capital improvements. For 2017, we'd have 350,000. 2018, 500,000. 2019, 760,000. And then it drops down a little bit. And again, that's based on, our water rates our water usage is declining. Electricity goes up a little year, things like that. So that's why you see a drop there. But the capital improvement plan that I laid out is much more money than that, and we intend to be able to do that additional work by borrowing the money. It really gives you the most bang for the buck, and the loan rates would be either 2%, 0, 2, or 3%. 3% is the worst case through the city. So that'll allow us to leverage that. Having said that, from 2021 to 2022, the loans the water department has on the treatment plants and storage tanks and the work that was associated with that, those payments per year will go from 1.8 million down to 855,000. So that'll provide some additional revenue as this is dropping off to continue on with a good program of water main replacement. In 2027, it drops down from the 855,000, and it drops down each year a little bit in 2022. But in 2027, it now drops down to 105,000 a year on the payments. Pretty much everything will be paid off. We'll have 105,000 that we need to pay. So really looking forward, I mean, I could be very pessimistic about what would happen in the future, but I think we can be very optimistic is that this is going to allow us to leverage some money to get some of this work done that really needs to be done. That's either water main replacements that are in very poor condition, and also some of the other stuff that we need to firm up the integrity of our water system. Our meeting house gatehouses, where all the water goes into the regional plant that supplies 2/3 of the city with water, needs to be completely redone. We know that. Mass DEP has told us to do that. The only thing stopping us is money. And the mayor actually, I brought him up there and showed them how bad it is. So that's something that's 100 years old or more, and it's finally at the end of its useful life. We're actually looking at something other than replacing that gatehouse. We're actually looking at installing a new intake that would last much longer. But again, going back to that, you see it's smaller amounts, but we're going to actually use that to leverage much more as far as borrowing. And that it actually hedges against the future because construction costs, the consumer price goes up like 2% a year. Construction costs are almost double that. They're going up like 3.5%, 4% per year. So what we pay for now, in fact, we're going to hedge against future increases and have that now. So even though we're paying some interest on that loan, it actually gets us it now, and we're paying the interest, but we're actually not having to deal with increases in costs each year.
Well, you see in the recovery of the economy is being reflected in construction pricing. In the 2008, 9, 10, there were some really low prices. And now we're seeing, projects across the state where the construction bids come up much higher than expected because they're recovering and they're starting to.
Councilor Di Natale, you had a question.
Sorry.
Is this going to fund any new hires?
No.
Can I get that in writing?
There is a business manager position that Public Works and Wastewater was looking at, just to be completely through it, and they asked me to fund part of it, and that I said I would. So, but otherwise, no additional full-time hires for the water department.
I would like something in writing to that effect, because I will state right now that if there's ever a request for a new hire, I'm not voting for it.
I'd be happy to provide that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, I look at this capital plan, and what scares me the most about this capital plan is what happens after 2020. I mean, we have 140 miles of pipe.
Right, and we'll talk about that a little bit more with the models and so forth that we're going to do. But again, with the loans being paid off, we're actually going to be able to get a couple $1 million a year, and hopefully our water use, the decline that we've seen, is going to level off and start to go up. And we've seen some development in the city. We at River Street, that new apartment building, huge water user. That replaces something that wasn't using a business that wasn't using much water. We have another one being done. If we just have a few more of those, and that's one of the things we looked at the rates. I want to attract, I don't want to be the one that detracts from the city. I want people to come here because every new user that we have is that much less that we have to, have other ratepayers for. And then we'll have money to actually continue these programs on, that combined with the payoffs of the treatment plants. So again, going back to the optimistic view, is that, we're actually look pretty good when you look at the loans out further, so.
Councilor DiNatale, you still have the floor.
I ask because I'd like to see that capital improvements number be as high as we possibly can make it,
Yeah.
and not have it go towards more personnel.
Right.
And this business manager that was just talked about, I'll speak on that more later, but was that originated from wastewater or you?
We had all talked about it together, so
Did we always have one?
there had been one in the past, yes.
Are things chaotic that we don't have that person anymore?
I know wastewater and
Well, wastewater
highway.
is already squeezing the city for more than they can stomach, so, that goes without saying, but, has that been budgeted?
I haven't completed my budget, based on this,
So
but
that's gonna be in the next budget.
my portion.
Good.
And I'm in full disclosure, so.
I'll get my scalpel ready for that one.
Councilor Beazle.
Thank you. So, you said we use 3.7 million gallons a day, right?
Right. That's
So-
the average over the year. Some days will go up to 7 or so, and other days will be less, in the coldest days of winter.
So if I times that by the increase that's going up, it gives me $2,557 a day, right, times 365. That's $933,357. Does that sound correct?
It's not a direct calculation like that because some of the water is given away. With the city schools and so even though the revenue's not the same, the city schools and all city buildings are not charged for water or wastewater. So just in water alone, the city schools and all city buildings use about $250,000 in water a year. So it's difficult to make that calculation. That 3.7 also includes leaks that we don't know about. With these older pipes, we know that there are some pipes that are leaking, and until they get bad enough that we actually notice them at the road surface. So I hesitate to say that that's inaccurate because there's a lot of other factors that you have to figure in, so.
Okay, because, personally myself, if I'd like to know the real number,
Yeah.
because I think all of those funds, if you're asking citizens to pay for this, all of the funds should go to fixing these pipes. And I
Right.
just want to make sure it's all going there, so,
Well, some of the last few years, 3 or 4 years, money has been taken out of retained earnings to balance the budget. So some of it needs, that was one of the reasons for the rate study to stop that bleeding. So some of it has to go to that because basically our revenues have gone down because people are using less water. And, some things have gone up. Electricity, we're having a good year for our fuel oil, for some of our heating and things like that. Natural gas has gone down. Chemical prices have gone up. We're using actually less chemicals than we did, but our costs pretty much are the same because those costs for chemicals have gone up, so.
And when we look at projecting the expenses, so you could have 0 capital projects here and still need to change rates because the expenses go up over time. And it's much less than like John just said, that the capital improvements are far and away the biggest change. But there is some, expenses that we looked at that are gonna increase over time, so we need to make sure you have the money for those, so you're not.
and
And it's not
I'm not
necess-
against any of the funding for
Yeah.
capital improvement or water, all that. I'm fortunate I can turn on my sink, drink my water. I don't have a well. I don't have to worry about that. What I'm saying, I guess, is if we're going to do this, then the funds we need to do this and get this done, right?
Yeah.
And the money, I just don't want the money disappearing. I want to make sure that we're accounting for it and that we can all sit here and say, 5 years from now, this is what we've accomplished, and we don't have people who can't drink their water or feel like, geez, if I wash my clothes, my whites are going to come out looking rusty. And I just want to make sure that when we're doing this, and we say we're going to do this, and we're going to increase, that we actually make sure that we see the benefits of it. Because I'm sure there's a lot of citizens out there now that are disgusted in their water.
Right.
And they want to see this fixed. And if all of a sudden, 4 or 5 years down the road, it's still not done, then people are going to wonder what happened to those funds. And
Right.
I would, even those funds as they're collected, I would like to see that increase go in a separate fund so we could actually see how much we're
You'll see
collecting.
what we budget, and, you know, anything it's above, if, say, we have a good year, you know, new customers come in, I mean, that'll all go into retained earnings, and that can't be used other than for the budgeted line items, so you'll see that too. But I can assure you, my goal, I mean, I don't want to be mistruthful and say it's all going to capital, because we do have things that go up a little bit each year. You know, generally 2% is what Mike had found. You know, some of it has got to cover that. Some of it's got to cover our operating expenses that have declined, you know, the revenue hasn't covered because of the revenue's declined because less water usage. But anything above that is going for capital, because, I mean, it has to be done. I agree with you 100%. I mean, I get calls every week, sometimes every days of the week, about water quality. And we do the best we can. I spend a lot of time with that, and I want to see these people have the best water that we can provide. And that's our goal. And, I got to give kudos to, like, our chief treatment plant operator. He's looked at our chemical usage and tweaked it in every which way. And when I was here 10 years before, we're using less chemicals than we did then. However, in 10 years, each of those chemicals has gone up 2%, so our budget amount's about the same. But instead of our budget amount being higher, we've actually decreased it. So that's money that, they've saved that could go for other things, so.
We still have a few more counselors with questions. I just want to remind everyone, we still have a bit of this presentation to get through. I want to make sure we're able to complete this in a timely fashion and still give opportunity for public comment before we begin deliberation. That said, Counselor Joseph.
Can you just explain that last page? Last year, we had a deficit of $608,000, where we had $541,000 in retained earnings. How does that work? Did you run?
So the balance, and I'm, okay, so the balance is the difference between the expenses and the revenue, okay? And the retained earnings was the actual balance as of the beginning of the fiscal year. So from this point, it goes up, down, from there. So that 608,000, and so one of the things of rate making is I calculate my revenue based on the actual consumption and the number of users and all that. John, it's a little more complicated because they look at revenue, they actually look at the receipts. So what they get, and this was that whole thing about the liens and all that, eventually it sort of washes out. They get all their money, but just not at once. So in 1 year, you're getting money from 2 years ago, and then you won't get the money from this year until a year later. So that this number is based on my calculated one, and John, I think you had looked at that.
All right.
I don't know if you want.
Well, it's going to be less than that, in fact.
Did you
it'll
have
be
$1
about
million in
300,000.
retained earnings?
What's that?
Did you have $1 million something in retained earnings?
Right now we have $541,000.
Right, prior year, but when you spent $600,000 more than you.
It's based on less revenue, and I think there's actually, I hate to say it, Mike, but I think there's an error in that slide, because you look at the expenses and it jumps up 300,000. There wasn't a 300,000. I think you put it in the capital.
They've used retained earnings. Last 3 years they've used.
See the, yeah, see the 5.3. It should be about 300,000. See the 5.3 down there.
Yep. Okay.
All right, so I guess my
We're
what was your actual deficit last year, and what was your
it was
retained?
276,000. So we took that out of retained earnings, and
The retained earnings
and
is
it's going to be about
878.
305,000 this year. So, and that came out of retained earnings, and the 541,000 is an actual figure that reflects what we currently have retained earnings, assuming we're going to run that same deficit. So when the budget was approved last year, 305,000 was approved, taken from retained earnings to balance our budget, and that 608 actually should be 305 or 308.
Okay.
So I use this as the starting point anyway, to go from there going forward. And we had plugged in the numbers from, so when we started this rate study was in FY14 or actually in FY15. And then we by the time we came here to talk about this, FY15 had passed, so I had to update those numbers based on the FY15 actual. So I
Counselor
think now
Caddy, you
we
had a
can-
question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Counselor Caddy.
I have 3 questions, but I'm going to wait until they finish their presentation.
And Council Di Natale, can your question wait
I'm
until
gonna
the
wait
end?
until the presentation.
All right. Talking about capital planning, so the same principle of transparency and informed decision-making applies here. So the current capital plan that John has put together, like you said, is low-hanging fruits, things he knows need to be fixed. So we put that in there.
And could I interject for a second?
Sure.
Sorry to do that, but that, when you see, it says low-hanging fruit, I mean, we've had capital improvement plans that have been done, not finished. Basically, the money wasn't there. We took everything that's done in the past, what we know about water quality problems in some of these areas, they're perennial, they're all the time, not perennial, they're all the time. And it's something that's been on a capital improvement list, some of them since the master plan was done for the water system in 1993. So that goes to show you how long it's been, and just somehow some of these streets just didn't get to. Something that got caught up in the midst of all this was the requirement to filter the water and build the treatment plants and the storage tanks.
So we're going to talk about how projects will be developed going forward. So we're going to use a risk-based decision-making process that's just a slight evolution from what has historically been done. And not all failures have the same consequences. So these two pipes, you know, when we talk about the hydraulic model, you can identify two pipes, same size, same vintage, in same condition. But if one is serving, you know, the end of a cul-de-sac with 4 houses versus the other one goes by a school or business district or whatever, they have different consequences. They have different effects on you. And that's what risk really talks about is how do I protect myself from the things I least want to happen? So, you know, you have things like critical users, it could be daycare facility, hospitals, whatnot. Number of customers affected, right? Outages are important to know how many of your people are going to affect, and you don't want to infect businesses, that kind of thing. Potential damages, we talked about the main that goes by the college, you know, it could cause a lot of damage there if something would happen. And so we're talking about looking ahead and thinking ahead. So the water department's working on developing 3 things that are going to help with both efficiency and decision making. The one is right now they don't have a GIS or a geographic information system. I assume everybody has some functionality or some awareness of those. Basically it's like a map and a database that go together, and I'll show you some quick examples. So one of the things that happens is and also one of our surprises in working with the city is that they have one of the best maintained sets of record plans I've ever seen. You know, you see the linens, and they're from the 1920s. You say, "Oh boy," and they say, "No, we've been updating them ever since." So they take them out and they dutifully change everything in there. And I'll show you some pictures of them. It's really quite impressive. But they have to go back and make a copy. So if they're out in the field, something happens, they don't have the record information at their fingertips. So this will help with that. And also, it would also help preserve those in case there was a damage or something. It is one physical thing. It's like a photograph. There's no backup. And in the office, the GIS is both a hub and a tool, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So the hydraulic model, I think Councilor Hay, you would ask me about how to determine this. So the hydraulic model is a computer program that also integrates with the GIS, and it basically tells you where are your deficient fire flows, where are your high loss areas for fire flow and for flow of water. You can do age of water. You can do disinfection byproduct formation. It gives you an ability to really understand what's going on in your system. And not only that, and I didn't put it there, but you can also then say, what happens if? So what if I replace that with an 8-inch pipe? Because water systems is not always as linear as you think, that you fix a pipe here and it fixes a problem over there. So we can actually do what-if analysis and sort of prove the process. And because we calibrate it, we have a good idea of how accurate it is. And the detailed record information makes that even more useful. So, and then the risk-based capital plan, like I said, we look at likelihood of something failing and then the consequences of it failing. And the consequences is really sort of the risk profile. And we talk about, holy cow, if this water main breaks, half the city out of business, well, we better focus on that. We better, take a look at that, and we'll prioritize that. And it also incorporates the city values. The city gets to weigh in and say, well, this is really, really important to me. This is not as important. You can just set a priority, which then helps you manage your own risk. So, like I said, in the field, no more driving back. In the office, it's a hub. So the hydraulic model, consumption data, capital improvements, and critical customers all can go in and come out of the GIS. It helps you visualize data, helps you analyze data. So right now, that's actually a picture of one of your maps. They're beautiful. They really are. They're very impressive, very detailed, very accurate. But it's not, you can't do anything with it. You have to look at it. You have to scale it if you want to measure something. When the GIS is done, you can query and say how many water pipes are 6 inches between 80 and 100 years old, and it'll show them on a picture. You can export that data. You can take it to a meeting. You can perform analysis on it. There's 900 sheets like this.
Just a quick question. When you say when this GIS is done, is this any of this dependent? Is this GIS mapping dependent upon a rate increase, or is this something that's already in the
Well,
works?
what it'll do is like, one of the things we're concerned is, and Council Vitale expressed this concern, like, what mains, and Council Hay, what mains we're going to do in the future. And, we know I have a plan, we have a plan for the next couple of years, but after that, we can't go in and do a whole neighborhood of streets. We need to optimize what's going on with those and figure out which mains are giving us the most bang for the buck, because some of them may be heavily tuberculated, some don't. We have pictures of some mains, which we showed you, but some we don't know of. So the hydraulic model helps us identify the worst mains, and we may be able to place one main in a neighborhood. Also helps us with water quality. Replace that main, and it'll improve everybody's water quality without replacing every main. And we can't afford, and this is the bottom line, it's like if we were really aggressive in replacing mains and actually did what we probably should be doing each year, and nobody can afford it. I've talked to them, it's the same thing. We're talking about doubling and tripling the rates to do, a few miles a year. We're talking about a couple.
John, I'm just talking about the process of GIS mapping and converting from physical paper copies to electronic.
No,
Is
you
that
can kinda go
dependent upon this rate increase, or is this already happening?
We're going to be working on it. It's something that's going to happen over the couple of years, so that when we get these ones water mains that we do know, that we're going to be able to use this to do it. And every water system should have a working hydraulic model, and ours hasn't been updated in like 10 years, and it'll help us look at water quality and things like that. So that's something that I want to go ahead with, unless there's absolutely no funds to do. So.
Thank you.
And that's something, once it's done, we'll be able to maintain it. Instead of updating our plans like we do, the person that's our CAD person will do it, so there's not an additional person required. He'll be able to do that. We'll be able to locate things with GPS. It'll help the fire department locate which hydrants have the best flows. There's a lot to do with that, plus helping us identify the mains, which we're going to give us the most bang for the buck and really improve a neighborhood. Because without cutting into every little section and looking at it, we can't tell in some cases. Some are very straightforward out on dead ends, but some aren't. So.
Thank you.
So this is just a picture of what a called electronic map system looks like. So it's got, and I actually have a live demo we can do later if you want. So this pipe that is selected tells you the length, its main size, what type, when it was, if it had, it depends on what your information you have to put in there, but you can have the year it was installed. And then also, after a hydraulic model is done, you can put the information from that in here. It's everything works through GIS now. So, and like I said, I have a live demo of this. I wasn't sure I was going to have it. So, out in the field, on the tablet, you can click on an area, and you can see here, I've got an outline. That's where my plan is. And you can actually bring that plan up in the field. So that guy doesn't have to run back to make a copy in the plant. He can actually just have it with him when he needs it. And they can also add data in there in the field. So there's a good one, too. So we're taking advantage of existing information, and we're just adding it electronically. So there's no cost with redrawing those or whatever else. We scan them, attach them, boom, it's in there. You can access. This is another very interesting slide. I'll talk about it really quickly. We talk about water complaints, right? People call up and complain about their water. Well, from our perspective as engineers, that's all data, and it's very good real-time data about your system. So this was my client Webster. We had done, they had horrible, horrible water quality problems, and they dutifully tracked them in a spreadsheet, gave it to our guys in the office, and they stuck it into the GIS, and literally 10 minutes later, I have a map. But the map was just different colored dots, and I really couldn't see it. So there's a feature, and this is built into the GIS software, the way it comes, that you could do like a contour map, and I could see where the concentration of complaints were, because we were going to do some ice pigging, and we wanted to know where are we going to get the bang for the buck. We got to make this stop now. So we looked, and we saw these concentrations. Well, okay, we looked into each situation. Why are we getting this? What do we think is happening here? And really had this big concentration of complaints here. And then we used the model to actually simulate what we thought was happening in the pipes and use that to diagnose it, and that's how we decided to fix that. And when we did, they went from having 430-something complaints in a 3-month period before to 50 complaints in a 3-month period after. So that's the value, like John is saying, that's the value of having this information, is you can then start to analyze it. It's not just captured and written down, but you're actually using it to fix your stuff.
And we actually already collect all that data. It's entered in the Munis. Unfortunately, each account doesn't allow us to do that type of analysis with GIS. Instead of entering the Munis, we'd enter in the GIS. And then if you had questions about areas, we could provide that, but also help us down the road, what areas have the most water quality complaints, look at the hydraulic model, and then optimize which pipe that we replace, because we can't afford to do it all. I mean, there's a lot of work that has to be done. We need to spend our money wisely. We have some that we know need to be done soon, but the ones in neighborhoods where, there's a complaint here, there's a complaint there, we need to figure out which water main in that neighborhood, because there's another neighborhood that has similar water complaints. We need to figure out which water main is going to give us the most bang for the buck and spend our money the most wisely that we have. So,
just real quick, on the hydraulic model again, what that does is you look at fire flows, loss capacity, age of water. Water has a freshness like milk does, and except it's not quite as long. And with the longer it sits in pipes, it can degrade in quality. So you can actually look, and the hydraulic model is an amazing piece of software, except when it comes to generating really cool looking output. This is the best I could find. It's a map showing water age, and you can see like you think there towards the sources it's good. Starts to get a little older out here, and then out the fringes it's really old. They've got some water quality issues here, or some water age issues, and it helps you diagnose that. So what if we loop this water main? Wow, we can see that's changed. So,
could I jump in one?
Yep.
Well, on that water quality, and one of the things that we're always having to test for and check for are disinfection byproducts. These are known carcinogens or suspected carcinogens, and the US EPA has tightened those rules quite a bit. So, in addition to figuring out which water mains we need to replace, we need to figure out, how we stay ahead of those regulations and keep those contaminants in the water system low. And if we know that one water is older in an area and we can replace the main and reduce the age and improve all that, that's a plus for us. There's, is it Marlboro or it begins with them? They just had a problem with disinfection byproducts, jumping over. We're at the edge of it in the summer months. We're very close, but we haven't gone over what the limits are, but we are close. And as the system ages, we're going to get closer or go over those limits for disinfection byproducts, and it may be a problem. So optimizing not only what water mains we give cleaner water to, we can make sure that, the disinfection byproducts, we stay within the levels that, are considered safe.
you can actually model that, the growth, and you can model the chlorine decay, because one of the many challenges of running a water system is you want to put enough chlorine in the front so that when you add the limits to your system, you still have an acceptable residual. It kills by having a residual, but you don't want to have so much that it tastes like a swimming pool. So you can model that too. Okay, so we talked about the risk-based capital improvement plan. I just want to show you a couple of things, just to show you the thought that's going to go into this and the planning. This is actual Fitchburg data. This data here, the condition data is just dummy data right now because we haven't done the work. But you can see we would have line by line access to the length, the year installed, the asset type, like that, and then from the GIS would come this information into our asset model, the breakage history, because we know that it's marked on those plans. We'll actually capture all that. From the hydraulic model, we get the condition rating hydraulically and the water quality condition rating. So those are factors that affect the condition of those pipes. And then we look at from the city, working with John and whoever else works with us, you can exactly rate and weight what's important to you. Is it, and it's hard with water because it's health and safety and all that, but you can actually tweak it a little bit so that it reflects your values. Because, some people are like, well, I want to be there right away when a water main breaks, but if I can't, we'll have to accept that. And it's all part of the big puzzle of how you figure out what's important. And then this is sort of the output. And this is, someone, Councilor DiNatale, I think, you were looking to see, like, where's this money going to go? And we can actually look. These are risk profiles of different pipes. These are your thresholds of where we're going to be okay with and what we're not going to be okay with. And we can actually manage that risk and manage the cost. And by the way, this is not a real number. I didn't want to show $9 million in year one. That's just dummy data in there. But that just goes to show the level of forethought that's going to go into where we do this, where we're going to get the return, And that is my last slide.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate you working so diligently through that. What I'd like to do, I know we all have questions, we all have comments, but we've had members of the public who have been quite patient. I'd like to do, as we do in the beginning of a council meeting, and open this up as essentially a public comment period, giving residents an opportunity to speak for 2 minutes or less. I realize it's not a lot of time, so I ask that you keep your comments brief. John, if you wouldn't mind just giving residents the opportunity to, if you could clear a small space there.
Absolutely.
So I'd ask residents who want to speak, please come forward. You'll speak your name, your address for the records. Do we need that as well? Okay. Name and address for the records, and then I'm going to be diligent to try to keep you to 2 minutes if you would be so kind. So whoever would like to come forth and speak first.
Got some good water here from 484 Shea Street.
Sir, if you wouldn't mind sitting at the center table, and then just begin with your name and address, if you would.
Michael Breton, 484 Shea Street in Fitchburg.
Great. Good evening.
Okay, I'm not used to talking in front of people like this, but
We'll take it easy.
I'll do my best. I complained to this guy maybe a million times. To all the councilors, pretty much. They know, you know, maybe 500,000 times. But our water is just the way it looks here. I've replaced water line, my water line that comes in the house, which cost me a couple of $1,000s. I had a valve I replaced this week for my. Brought some notes. It's a. Let me see. Honeywell mixing valve, which I replaced, and that was on a new system I installed a year ago. I've complained to the mayor. Well, he wasn't the mayor then, but I still complain to him. I haven't complained to him since he's been mayor because I want to leave people alone a little bit because I don't want to look like the bad guy that's always complaining. But this is the way my water is, and all my shower, I always have to clean them up, my shower, valves and stuff. So there's a lot of problems on Shea Street, and that's what I want to state. And as far as water usage, like they said, they sell less water. Well, because maybe the storage rate is so high that people use less water. Plus, people buy bottled water. That's what I do at my house, do my cooking. For drinking water, of course, I wouldn't drink this. You have to boil it or something, but it doesn't get the rust out. The rust is what screws up all the appliances in the house, dishwasher, washer, the whole works. And the clothes, like the whites, like the lady said over there, they come out yellow, no matter how much you try to clean them. Anyway, that's all I got to state for today. And
Thank you, sir.
thank you very much. Listen, I wasn't much of a speaker in school.
You'd like to quit. I don't want to put Q&A. You get the opportunity afterwards. Do we have anyone else wishing to speak? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Christine Breton. I also live at 484 Shea Street in Fitchburg. I grew up in the house that I'm living in right now, and on 484 Shea Street. We just moved back there probably a year and a half ago, and I was appalled by the water. I didn't realize my father was going through all those problems that he had. I always blamed it on him. He wasn't flushing. He wasn't, whatever he was doing, wasn't doing it right. Till I moved up there. We put a new heating system in, like you said. We've had the repair guys over there. It was under warranty till the warranty ran out just a couple of months ago. So we had to have that flushing valve, whatever the valve was, replaced. And that cost us $400 and something. We've also had our shower heads replaced. This is all brand new shower heads. Trying to think what else. Brand new dishwasher. We had to have it repaired because the rust is building up inside. I had to buy a new Keurig coffee maker because the rust was building up inside. I'm trying to think what else I wrote here. We had to buy a new washer. The washer, granted, wasn't brand new, but it was only like 5 or 6 years old. because the rust was building up inside. It's terrible to know that. I know the pipes have been getting worse. You know, I grew up in that house, it was fine. I can see the deterioration. I grew up in the city. It's time for the city to repair the pipes. It just has to be. If it's by an increase, I'm willing to pay it. It's not because my water's bad. I know people all over the city, too, have had problems with the water. And some people have clean water. So it's just where the pipes are and where the deterioration is. But I'm for repairing and fixing the pipes because you live in the city, you pay the taxes. I shouldn't have to buy. I have a water cooler in my house that I never had to have before. I have bottled water that I buy for cooking and drinking. I've had to throw out T-shirts that are yellow. So I'm paying all these things I shouldn't have to pay when I'm paying taxes. And I do own more than one house in Fitchburg, and I know the water quality sometimes is better in my other house than it is at mine. But like I said, depends where you are in the city. I also have, there's a Patty Pezzolezzi. I'm representing her that lives at 487 Shea Street, and she wrote a statement I'd like to read if that's okay. The problem with the water has been a substantial issue for me since I moved into this residence in June of 2015. I've had rusty water when I installed my pool in August of 2015. And I think you and your son had come over there to see the rusty water. She had just filled up a brand new pool. She had to buy more chemicals just to rectify the problem. It took a long time to get out of that water. And she said at such time she had the water department come out. I've had continuing rusty water fill my brand new dishwasher installed in July of 2015, which I've had to disrupt the washing cycle to fix. I have had to flush my water heater of the rusty water to prevent buildup of rusty water to lay dormant in my water heater and destroy the heater. She's had people come over and fix her furnace. Myself and my children and my mother have had to put off showering due to rusty water that fills my tub. Brushing our teeth with bottled water due to the rust in the water. This is an ongoing problem which is both inconvenient and costly. And it says Patty Ann Pezzolezzi. So I just want to thank you for your time on this, and thank you for the councils that have responded to us.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? All right, seeing none, I'd like to ask Mike and John to please return. Councilor Caddy, I have Councilor Di Natale first, and then you. Councilor Di Natale, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a lot to say, obviously. John, my earlier comments, I don't want you to construe my attitude as being directed at you. I'm frustrated because I've had a lot of residents contact me since this came out. And a majority of them have said to me that they are not opposed to a rate increase if it can be demonstrated to them that the money's going to go to fixing the systems. And I don't blame them for feeling that way. There was a rate increase done in 2011. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe a lot was done when that occurred because we've been using the retained earnings for the last 3 or 4 years. I know that for a fact. We've been eating into it.
A couple miles of pipe were replaced as part of the sewer project, the sewer separation project, and that was actually, a lot of the money went to pay for that loan because Dennis at Arch had borrowed $2 million for that.
So given that fact, I guess my issue right off the bat is when we were proposed a rate increase in 2011, we saw the same kind of graphs that you gave us that showed the retained earnings was going to be healthy, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and instead 5 years later we see the retained earnings almost reduced to nothing. So that is one reason why they're concerned. They're skeptical, and I don't blame them for feeling that way. But the big albatross around the public's neck is the sewer rate. I understand the facts are unequivocal. We pay the lowest rate for water in the region. Before we do a celebratory dance over that, these other communities don't pay Unitil. These other communities don't have a sewer rate that went up 70% a couple of years ago, and it will continue to increase in perpetuity until that ridiculous unfunded mandate is done. And I call it ridiculous because I hear the terms DEP and EPA, who I like to call the DC wizards of smart, who understand our residents more than we do. Okay? They seem to think we're Newburyport, where we can afford anything. So they lay this unfunded mandate on us that's going to saddle the residents for 30-plus years. We have to understand that 70% increase in the sewer bill, that's going to continue.
Right.
So what's unfortunate, when I saw this proposal, I said, you know, if I was the water department, and Mr. DeLine in particular, I'd be looking at wastewater going, you guys are going to kill me for the next 25 years, because the bill is combined. It separates the two, but it's combined. I had a couple of residents call me and go, my bill went up astronomically 2 or 3 years ago. What's this? And I explained to them, well, that was the sewer portion of the bill. I pay $27.35 a month for water and sewer on a month where I don't really use anything. $8.50 of that is water, and the other 18 and change is sewer. My bill is 69% sewer, only 31% water. And the more water you use, the higher your bill is on the sewer end. So the fact that that's combined really has clouded the public in terms of understanding that this isn't raising the sewer rate. There's another rate involved here, a rate that is substantially low, but you wouldn't know that from your overall bill. Right. So that's number one. And, number two is obviously Unitil. Number three are the property taxes that keep going up while home values decline. So we should understand why the public... There is a large sector of the public who I am convinced don't want any increases, no matter what the justification is, no matter what the reason is, because they've been punched in the face a few times already, and now we're going to deck them again. For whatever reason, I personally have gotten more ample information from you for this increase than I did 4 or 5 years ago. I voted against that 4 or 5 years ago because I didn't really get anything that convinced me of really where this was going to go forward. We have a packet this thick with pictures and data, stuff that really emphasizes the condition of our system. And I heard a couple of the individuals talk just now, the public. They echoed a lot of other calls I got from people. If it can be demonstrated it improves the public health and quality of the water, they are fine with it, because everyone acknowledges that things have to increase every now and then. Number two is, I mentioned not hiring more employees earlier because I have been very concerned about the city's liability structure, unfunded. We owe $258 million in unfunded liabilities, health care and pension costs. Every year the city is going to see an increase of $700,000 in the pension budget. So every time a taxpayer gets an increase, 70% of that increase is going to subsidize employee benefits that they get no benefit for. So I am stressing unequivocally that if I see one new hire as a result of this increase, it is going to cloud my judgment on, it's going to enhance my skepticism going forward. I don't care what the new employee is. I don't care. Because the answers we got tonight and the information we got tonight was all about the system. Not about we don't have enough people, although I'm sure everybody in the city can make a case that they don't have enough people. But, so that's why I very much emphasize that point, and you've answered it. So, for right now, it's important that we understand that. I don't think there's going to be ever a good time to do this. But if it can be demonstrated and there is obviously a need, I can't look at these pipes and not go home at night and say to myself, I didn't do anything to try to even start correcting the problem. I had one gentleman call me and say, well, why did we wait this long to start addressing this problem in such a comprehensive way? Maybe we have, maybe we haven't. But his point was some of these pipes are 100 years old. And I answered the question to him like this. It doesn't surprise me, and this is not pointing the finger at anybody. This is just the city of Fitchburg once again demonstrating how poor planners we are. You look at the old City Hall building. You look at all of our buildings we own. That is a microcosm of how we are terrible as planners of capital needs. We may know what we need to do. I said to him, I think it's the political will. I think there have been instances the water department has asked for increases, and the council or the mayor, whoever was in charge at the time, said no way, because it's not politically popular to do. But if it's for this kind of a use, it makes sense because every company has a capital budget. We have 140 miles of pipe that you guys have identified are in very bad shape. 50%, you said, of the ones that were installed 60 or 50 years ago have a 50% or higher rate of failure.
Yep. Potential.
I mean, let's just assume we had to fix everything. Does anybody know we're going to get $140 million? We're never going to get that money. So my concern going forward is after this rate increase, what's the future after that? It almost sounds, it's a lot to take in, it almost sounds when you listen to it that there are going to be increases in infinity, in perpetuity, as long as possible before all this is taken care of. This increase isn't going to solve every problem. It's probably going to put a tiny little nick in the windshield that you're not even going to notice, considering the gravity of the issue. So my question is, after the 5 years, is that when we have to do another study? Or, I mean, how much, I mean, what's the bill going to be in 2022, if you will? Because, again, my concern is the other side of the equation.
The fortunate thing we have working for us is that the treatment plants their loans will expire, so we'll be able to use that money toward capital. You know, I'm not going to deny our expenses are going to go up a little bit each year. You know, healthcare, everything else associated with our employees that we have will go up. You know, electricity may go up. We maybe have a better year for fuel, but you know, when those loans are paid off, we can put that for capital, and then we have to reevaluate at that point whether we want to borrow more money and do a lot of it, or start doing it a couple $1 million a year. Because the amounts that I put up there, $600,000 or $700,000 a year, isn't a lot of money. It just allows us to leverage a lot of money until we have those loans paid off to give us a couple $1 million a year. I'm hoping in the meantime that maybe our water usage will start to creep back up with some of the development that we've seen, because a factory full of apartments versus an empty factory is a huge plus for us. I mean, we generate quite a bit of revenue on that, and all we need is that downward tick to stop and start to level off and come back up. And that, combined with paying off the plants, I actually, looking at this, I can be very pessimistic. I say, well, I'm never going to be done with this, but looking ahead, that we can do that. And in the first 3 years, we can, someplace like Shea Street, which is on the first list, View Street, Bond Street, some of these worst areas can be tackled and try to get this under management, make it manageable. And with what we looked at as far as the GIS and better management of the water system, I think that we can, the 140 miles, some are real bad, probably about 40 to 60, I think I mentioned, we're probably equivalent to this, that eventually have to be replaced. But, if we're in an area where, there's a bunch of streets intersecting, we may be able to replace one or two of those mains, improve everybody's water quality, get fire protection where it should be, because I'll tell you right now that there are areas in the city that don't have adequate fire protection. When they turn on the hydrant, there just isn't enough water to fight a fire. So we need to look at all that together. And that way we don't have to, we can kind of, I don't want to say put off doing the 140 miles, but at least make it manageable so that, we can provide good water like the city used to be known for, and also provide adequate fire protection.
So I'm looking at this capital improvement plan you gave us in one of your emails. And can I just ask that, I believe the best way to get the public on board with these things, I think lack of information, lack of understanding of the system and what the problems are, through no fault of their own, is a piece of why a lot of people may not want to do this. So I am stressing to the city that we post this presentation on the website, and even this capital improvement. I mean, I want as much information as possible disseminated to the public so they can digest this on their own time and see what we're seeing.
Right.
Okay? And just so they understand, because I'm afraid it's going to be coming across as we just rubber stamped another increase when there's a lot of things that are going into this proposal that are going to go well beyond 2020. So
we'll have it on there tomorrow. Actually,
Okay.
my right hand was on vacation, Missy Eckstein, so we were in the last week, so she wasn't able to help me out with that. So, but it will be on there tomorrow. We'll have all that information for people to see. So and I try to be, if any customer calls, and I think Mr. Breton can confirm that, is that I spend all the time in the world with them. I mean, I don't ignore calls. I take the calls no matter how unsavory they may be, and try to, explain to them the situation. Shea Street's a good example. We've worked over and over there, Flushing, trying to figure out closed valves to try to direct water, that change the flow of the water, and we're at wit's end. We just can't solve it without replacing that section of pipe.
So what was the answer again about how much feet of pipe have we replaced since 2011?
2011, about 2 miles.
2 miles. So how many feet is that? I don't have my
10,560.
So about 5,000 feet is a mile.
Right.
Okay, so we've replaced 2 miles in the last 5 years. And we're replacing it with what? What you see on the right there?
This is ductile iron, and it has a cement lining that will prevent this from occurring in the future.
And that's a 100-year life, give or take?
I would say so, unless, like, in case we have some, some places we have poor soils where it may be aggressive to the metal, and we try to wrap those pipes with plastic too.
Okay.
But sometimes you can't, hedge against all of that.
So I see in the capital improvement plan that not in 2017. There's a lot of other stuff we're doing here. But 2018, you have in here, replace or clean 2 miles of pipe, and you list the streets. Beacon Street, Berkeley Street, Bond Street, Brigham Park, Dudley Street, Fitchhill Ave, Haskell Street, Highview Street, Lenox Street, Longwood Ave, Lavisa, Newport Street, Pershing Street, Shea Street, View Street, Winch Street. So you outline very nicely the streets that will be first on the list in FY18, and that's for $2.1 million. That's 2 miles of piping. And then in FY19, another 2 miles of piping.
Right, and we have a list, but I want to get the worst bang for the buck, and we may see something that we don't like in these replacements here.
So I'm assuming those streets I listed and for FY18, those are the worst of the worst?
Yes.
Okay, and
those are the streets that we do have the bleeders on.
Yeah.
We need to stop that because it's just wasting water. And then at some point, those bleeders aren't going to work anymore.
So if I look at all the totals for the next four years, fiscal years, 4.2, 7.3, approximately $10 million of capital improvement investments
Right.
will be made as a result of this over the next 4 years,
Right.
of which roughly 6 miles of piping.
Yes.
So the 10 million is not for all the 6 miles. There's other things on this list, but just for the miles of piping, it's 2.1, 2, 4.1, 6.1 million of the 10 million is going to pipe replacement.
Right.
The other 3.9 is going to facility upgrades, because as you outlined, we can't forget these facilities that treat these systems.
Just an example, the water storage tanks that were built 10 years ago, what they're finding is that the ice formation in those, which wasn't really thought of at the time, is actually damaging the interior of the tanks. Winchendon, where I was Public Works Director, those storage tanks there, we found that they're 20 years old. Now they have to have extensive repairs on the inside because of that ice formation going up and down. So they have mixtures that they put them in now that prevent that ice formation, but it also helps us with disinfection byproducts and water quality, because when water goes into the tanks from the ground, it's cold. It kind of settles in the bottom of the tank, and then it just doesn't mix well. So this will improve water quality too. But those are the type of things that need to be done to protect what's there. We don't want to spend any more than we have to on that, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we can bring water to the city. And we have a huge investment in those tanks. $4 million back when they're built. Now they're probably about $8 million, and we need to spend $250,000 to make sure that they last for 20 or 30 years. So
2 other points, and I'll be finished. The next one I have is, again, not to pit the water against the sewer, but the sewer, I have lost a lot of confidence in terms of estimating projects, because we just had a bombshell thrown at us a few months ago that there was a project we had in the pipeline that ended up being $9 million more than what we estimated. How do you guys arrive at these figures? Because obviously costs go up every year. We have costs listed here for capital improvement projects going out 4 or 5 years from now. How comfortable are you in these estimates? Or are these just ceiling numbers that, if we can't get 2 miles for $2 million, it's really only going to be 1.5 miles by that point for $2 million?
Just for the water main, just to speak to that, is that I'm confident we'll do those 2 miles. I figured high, $200 a foot, but if some of these can be cleaned and lined or downsized because they don't need to be as large, we can actually save some money. We may actually be able to do more. I'm confident, that in the next 3 years that we can do that many feet a year, because $200 is at the upper limits. More than likely it's $160 to $200, but I want to be conservative so that I can accomplish that. So, and it's a lot easier for me because this water main is installed all the time across the country, and Ty and Bond, Weston and Sampson, not to talk about your competitor, but we have good figures from them of what it costs, so.
And the current debt payments we're making right now, you said they're gonna be over in 2021, 2022?
They're gonna drop down,
When do they start considerably dropping?
in 2021 to 2022. It'll go from $1.8 million a year down to $855,000, so almost $1 million drop then. And then in 2027, it'll drop from 855. It's going to be a little bit more gradual then, down to 105. So 10 years from next year, we'll be down to 105,000 from $1.8 million right now. So that's why, that's where I can be optimistic, is that, you know, we're going to borrow quite a bit of money just to get some of these, put out these fires, because that's what they are, and they're burning right now, because, and then sooner or later, we're going to have a greater problem than what we have with something happening with the water there. Get these taken care of, and then when we have the rest of that money come in as the loans paid off, we can actually maybe pay for water main as we do it. And like I said, I'm hoping that we have that downward trend in water use level off, which I've seen the last couple of years, and maybe start to pick back up. And I mean, the other goal is to sell some water. I mean, when, you know, the Lunenburg Water District calls me about emergency connection, potentially selling some water there, we follow up with it. We want to sell water to somebody else, because if we can sell that water, then that's money that we can put right toward capital. A little bit of expense with conveying it there, but that'll help. And you know, we want to follow up in every area. So we're looking at everything we can to try to sell water too, to do that. Some of these towns that need water aren't quite at the edge, you know, but sooner or later they may desire it, and we have enough water. We also don't want to sell away our future too, because we want to be able to provide for development and, you know, maybe a large water here's here, but right now we have a pretty good, you know, buffer. So
is it fair to assume then by 2022, 2021, obviously the rate increase will have will be over in terms of it'll be stagnant?
Yeah.
Am I to rightfully assume then that after that period, we won't need one at that point? Because that debt service is going down so much by $1 million. Yeah. That $1 million you can then use to go after another 5,000 feet. You know what I mean? So I'm expecting that after this increase, if it were going to affect, there should be a 3 or 4 year period where we won't really need one, because our debt service is going down considerably at that point.
Right. And going back to US EPA and DEP, that's the biggest unknown, because we are testing for unregulated contaminants, and they're actually having us do some additional tests that actually add us. I just got the estimate yesterday. You know, they require us to test for cryptosporidium and coming into the plants, and that's an additional 10,000 a year. I wish I could say that's the biggest unknown, because I don't know what they're going to plan for us down the road. The good thing is, like I said, the reservoirs, we have. You know, somebody said, "Oh, that's crazy to have all that land around there." But let me tell you, that's going to really help, because we don't have the threats to our reservoirs that a lot of other communities have, and it's well protected, and may help us in the future to avoid additional treatment, because we don't have these unregulated contaminants that they're looking at in our water.
Well, I have no doubt these outside agencies are going to be chomping at the bit to tell us what to do.
I just want to let you know that.
Yeah, and you know, they're going to be telling us what to do, because it's easy to tell someone to do something when it doesn't have to come out of their pocket, you know, because they know best.
I get an email like every other day about, we're going to be looking at this, we're going to be looking at that. And
well, they got nothing better to do. You know, your tax dollars at work. Thank you.
Councilor Caddy.
I've got 3 questions that apply to Shea Street. If this rate increase passes, where is Shea Street on the list, and when will it get done?
It's in the first round, but it may not be done until next summer. I probably won't be done until next summer. To try to get all this main designed and a contract out the bid would take 2 or 3 months at least, what would you say? And by that time, the construction season will be over. We're better off bidding it over the winter months. I mean, if we were going ahead, we should have bid it in the winter months, because we'll get much better pricing. Right now, a lot of the larger contractors already have their work lined up for the summer. And if they bid on anything now, it's going to be much higher. And because we're limited by freezing temperatures, we don't want to start a job in August or September, because the temporary water has to be laid on the top of the road. Sure. But what I would like to do is start off spring of next year, have the bid, everything designed and out the bid.
Bond, Arlington, View?
That's in that same group, the first group, so.
Okay, secondly, because we're going to be a year out, is there any chance of an inline filter to relieve the problems that they're having?
It would have to be in the house. There's not anything we can do in the mains themselves. We've really looked at everything we could do there.
There's no inline filter for a main?
Not for a water main. I mean, their water is coming in right, you know, for Mr. Breton, where his service is tapped, that water sits overnight, and I think he can confirm that. It's mainly in the morning is the worst, right? Right, that water sits in that area right there, so.
All right. The third thing I've never understood with the city, I heard you talking earlier about having pure water that's coming out of the reservoirs. If we have such pure water coming out of the reservoirs, and it's the delivery system that's the problem, why can't these people go to the treatment plant and get water for free, drinking water, cooking water? It seems to me, at the filtration plant, you have a wonderful source.
Yeah.
And if we could do that, a lot of people I know buy bottled water.
Yeah.
Why can't we sell water at the filtration
Not
plants?
sure, can we do that? I'd have to look into that, and,
I'm saying that, John, because years ago, I think.
yeah, we
again,
talked
the first
about
time,
bottling, and,
We talked
Yeah.
about bottling, but in fact, there's a place in the Cape, it's a little tiny hut on the side of the road,
right,
and for 25 cents, you can fill up a gallon of water.
right,
It seems to me that people that have the issues
yeah.
should be able to get it and not have to pay for it.
We
But-
can look
But
at that.
expand on that for the general public, because people still
Yeah.
like to buy pure water.
Yeah. We can do that, but it's a different set of regulations for bottling water than Mass DEP doesn't regulate. It's regulated by the State Board
And
of
again,
Health, so.
it's just difficult to hear.
I can look at it,
How
though.
you say how
No.
pure
Yeah.
water we have.
Yeah.
And I think there's an opportunity that
Yeah.
you could be selling water.
No, the water, I
I
mean,
think
my office is at the plants. I drink it all the time. It's perfect, so.
And then just two quick questions, I hope. On the pipe replacement, is that going to be in-house or outsourced, or a combination?
It's outsourced. A contractor does it. It's
We're
just
not
too
capable-
labor.
Okay.
We do short stretches.
Yeah.
We do little bits, but as far as something like that, laying out the temporary water and doing all that, the actual water main replacement is very labor intensive on the water department side.
Okay.
Even if they don't do the work, because they have to help with all the connections to the houses, turn valves,
Sure.
and make sure that is. So they do work with the contractors to make
So
sure
the
that work's done.
The last one, it's, I think, a little more technical. If you're going to replace a pipe, let's say you're going to replace a pipe up in Shea Street, but the line that feeds that pipe has tuberculation. What effect does that have on the new pipes that you put in?
Some of that pipe's already been replaced. There'll be a dramatic improvement in their water, but it won't be, if there's a high flow or a fire, something like that, you'd still see an upset. But their water would be dramatic, would be 95% of the time would be perfect, so.
All right, thank you.
But when you have a large grid with, different levels of tuberculation, if you have a fire, water main break or something like that, that could stir things up. So I'm not gonna say that they're gonna be, once that pipe's replaced, they don't have to do anything anymore. Something will happen. Even the people that have good water across the city, they still, when there's a fire, water main break, they still have a period of discolored water, so.
It is interesting, though, that there's defined areas with good and bad water. It's not crossing all around the system, so I think that supports what he's saying, that, you can make local improvements to it.
Mr. Deline, in the spirit of Council Caddy's question about Shea Street, is there an option to put in a bleeder to alleviate some of the
We actually have
ongoing
one
problems?
running up there, and it hasn't been effective, so we have one running between that's the Oak Hill system. We have one running between the Oak Hill system and the High system, and it actually would be much worse if that wasn't running, but we've been running that, and it's that bad, so. The problem is, can I talk a little bit before you ask? Is that section of pipe, and that's why we tried turning the valves, that bleeder's going, but that section of pipe is so tuberculated, we can't move water through it. I mean, when we turn a hydrant on up there, it barely trickles out. Your garden hose at a good house is better than that. That's how bad it is. So even though that's going, that pipe on Shea Street is probably much smaller than this, and the water that we flow comes from another pipe. I tried closing that valve to redirect the flow, to try to send it all through here to try to clean up the water. It didn't work. Closing the other valve then causes less fire protection or fire flows for another section of the pipe. So if we did that, and it really didn't improve their water when I was talking to Mr. Breton, is that we putting people at risk because we'd be compromising the fire flows in one part of the neighborhood, and we don't need to compromise them any more than they already are.
Council Caddy has a follow-up.
John, what about a summer service? Is that too expensive to run a summer service above ground? When you see it, in other places when they're doing heavy construction?
That's something we can.
At least you might get.
Mr. Katie, I was
7
thinking that same thing while you were talking.
One of the things that also we could look at too is, and it's something that they've had some success in, is what they call ice pigging. He mentioned it earlier. And basically, they don't have to take that water main out of service. They basically put ice pump it through one hydrant and out another hydrant, or actually all the junk water comes out the other hydrant. That cleans most of this down, and that can be a temporary measure. It can be done for cheap money. That's something we could try. Actually, this summer.
They'll do
on that stretch
a sample for you for like $3,000.
Yeah,
they'll come and just try one pipe.
That's something we could try, and that's something we talked about. They'd actually had some success. It's something that's come out in the last couple of years, and it's not. We're not going to be able to ice pig all our water mains. It's not going to work, but it might help for an area like that, where we haven't had any success any other way. So
We're looking at a substantial amount of months before
Right.
they're going to get any relief. There's got to be something we can do to,
yeah, we can
to at least give them some relief between now and next
we
summer.
could, I think the ice.
I'll call the guy.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know how much it would be for that 1,645 feet?
Yeah, what'd you say, 1,500, right?
Yeah, so.
Oh, there you go.
in Webster, we did, they will do, pilot sections that try to, demonstrate their product, but I don't know how long they can do. They have a small unit. In the town I was talking about, we did 13,500 feet of pipe of various diameters for $80,000. So.
Ouch.
It's a lot of, it's 3 miles of main, though, of the worst pipes,
Well, that whole area has been put upon it. I mean, another year of that is just not acceptable.
And the thing is that
Is any relief
that
we
main
can
is
give
6
them?
inch, and it really should be upgraded to 8 inch because for fire protection. And otherwise, we'd clean and line it, but it's something that needs to be replaced.
Thank you.
Council Green.
And I know the Bretons personally, and I know that her father has put up with that for years and years in that area. So I'm looking for whatever relief we can give to them so that they can at least be comfortable in their home. A couple of things. Their water is caused directly from the tuberculosis of the main of the pipe.
Right. I mean, this is all iron deposits
Yep.
primarily, and basically when that water sits there, especially overnight, it basically, it's like taking clean water and dumping it into, some mud or something like that. It does that. So over the course of the day, after it's used a bit in the morning, nobody using water at night. It gets used up. Mr. Breton flushes stuff through his house. Everybody else flushes their house. It gets used, and it's gone. And then overnight, the whole cycle starts all over again. So that's what a bleeder does. It actually keeps that water moving, so it doesn't have a chance to sit in there. So, and like I said, we have one running up there, and we've tried every which way, closing valves, opening valves, redirecting the water, flushing the water. I mean, we spent an awful lot of time, and it's one of the most frustrating areas to me because we've been able to kind of cope with everything else except that one there. So, but yeah, the iron, when it sits in there, that iron just comes out of, just kind of equalizes in there, and the water turns the color you've seen in one of those glasses. So.
And my other question is, how do you go about collecting the data? I know when I've called you, in particular on Winch Street, what is your means of collecting data when residents call in and say, my water is rusty? I mean, I'd like to think that Ward 1, our residents are good, but I do know that you get constant complaints from a couple of residents.
We log it into the Munis system, and that's where the GIS would be much more helpful because the Munis system, we have a log of it, so we know that address is a common problem, but we have no way of pulling that data together. Munis doesn't allow that, so we'd like to do that so the counselors, myself, we'll be able to have that information. Plus water main breaks, I know that we've asked many times, and we have all the water main breaks down, but to actually put that into, I'd like to be able to, I wish I could bring a map here and show you where the water main breaks were. And if I started making copies, I could do that, but it's just very labor intensive. It'd take, a month of somebody putting everything together to put together a plan. We've documented them all, but with GIS, we'll be able to put that in there, and that'll help us in, future capital. It's like this water main from this era, from 1943, because World War II was going on, is much lower quality. the thickness of it, and we can say that that's an area, and we see it in other areas of the city that we should be tackling. So.
Right. What solutions are you offering to the, I don't want to say chronic complainers, but I mean to the chronic problematic properties? What is the short-term solution?
It's just to flow water all the time or to flush it. I mean, we have monthly flush. We have the bleeders that we mentioned, and I have monthly flushing at different streets. And if somebody calls in the interim and has another issue, we'll go out and run the water, and we'll tell them if it continues a problem or can return, just to give us a call. Most people will clear up, but some of them, the worst areas just can't. And that's how, like I said, Shea Street's been the most problematic, and like I said, frustrating to me because I haven't been able to resolve it. Other ones, I think you saw the email from the people in Haskell. We've been able to correct that one, and I wish we could do for the same for them.
All right. And my last point is, in the beginning of your presentation, you had made reference to DEP notices and noncompliance. Right. And, when you hear that, it's, oh my God, it's dramatic to hear. But then looking through the summary of those, I was a little shocked that, some of them have to do with, cutting the vegetation down or, doing...
I didn't get a chance to go through all those. Most of that's been taken care of. The ones that haven't been taken care of are the major money ones.
Well, my point is, after reading that, I wasn't really concerned with DEP because if it's, to shore up your, your mitigation service or, to put in an emergency plan for a shutdown. I mean, this has nothing to do with the quality of the water.
And the capital improvement plan doesn't include any of that stuff. It's just something that we need to do, our in-house. The ones that are major money, like the Meeting House Gatehouse, that's in here. It says to redo it. The Mare Meadow Pump Station, redo it, fix the roof. The Narrows Road PRV Station, fix it, redo the roof. Those are in there, and those are in my capital improvement plan. So, I'm not trying to scare you, just a list of it. And that you're right. You pick through these, and there are some, the major ones. Is probably will fill up one page versus how many pages are here, and the other ones that we have dealt with, and they are very picky. In fact, when they come through and they look at everything, and that's why you can say that the water is safe to drink, because not only they look at everything, and when they come and do the sanitary survey every 2 to 3 years, 2 people or 3 people from Mass DEP spend a week out here going through every part of our system, all our records, looking at every plant, going through every pump station, looking at every nook and cranny to make sure that there's nothing that we're falsifying, because it does happen sometimes in water systems. We don't. Make sure there's no errors, make sure there's no vulnerability that we've missed. They're very, very, and some of this stuff is nitpicky, but at the same time, it's stuff that, it's housekeeping stuff that we should be doing. It shouldn't even have been on the list. It shouldn't have got to that far, fixing a fence or something like that. And it's something that we, need to work on all the time, so. But having said that, like I said, they're so nitpicky, that's why I can say, the water is safe, because not only do they look at this, they look at our water quality results all the time, they look at our distribution system, they pick the worst places to collect samples. We have a sampling plan, 10,000 samples a year that are sent out, bacteria, the whole gamut of potential, contaminants, and they look at that sampling. We don't pick the best spots. They pick them for us. They figure out what our system is. They're very familiar with it, and they want to know where the worst case is, and they collect that water sample to make sure that is the worst case. So.
No, I mean, I looked at that list and thought, wow, frivolous, but I don't want to get the DEP on my back, so good luck with that. Thank you.
Councilor Joseph.
I guess I just don't want to bring up the old tapes, but it is disappointing that after, I think I visited Councilor Caddy's area 10 years ago when they were doing a demonstration on relining pipes. And they were relining the pipes up in that area. They were getting done over on Jerry Street. I know that it was just a matter of course to just get it done every year. So it was not even a matter of all the retained earnings. It was a matter of your budget was used to line pipes and stuff like that. So it's just getting away from that, I guess, is a disappointment. And now having to come back and do that as such a higher expense is something that bothers me. We should have just kept our programs in place, kept the programs going. If we had problems with our retained earnings, I mean, they've been telling me, and I don't like to say this, but I mean, for the last 14 years, the reason we need the retained earnings is to maintain our pipes. 2 miles of pipes a year, every year. Okay, and I've heard that song and dance for 14 years. Well, I guess it happened for 4 years maybe 1 year in the last 10 years, but for the other 9, it just stopped happening.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that it's not your fault, but it's just something that bothers me, so I guess I'd like to hold the water department accountable and have us get the reports on what water mains are being replaced every year going forward, so that we know what's happening with our money and that the project didn't stop. I think at one point we were even using water department money to balance the city budget, not just the water budget. So I guess that really, things like that.
Buy a fire truck and stuff. Buy a fire truck and stuff.
Things that have happened like that in the past have really bothered me because they never came to light until after the budget process was over. And so that being said, please just keep us updated as to what's happening. And I want to see that it's happening 2 miles a year, every year for the next 20
I'd be happy
years.
to keep you updated, because I love, I send you an email now and then, especially the last couple of weeks. But
Now and then.
I'd like to keep you informed. I really do. And there's nothing that's going to make me happier than to see progress with this. I mean, I personally love to see stuff done. I don't like to be stagnant. I mean, I want this work done for the people here. I mean, I like working here. That's why I'm back here. I enjoy who I work with, and I just want to make sure that the city's on the right track for the future, because that's, I want to be able to look back at what I did and make sure that things are laid out properly, so that, long after I'm gone, that I was a good steward for it, and that, the city's on the right track and the water mains are, in a better condition. I want to leave it better than when I started here, so. And I will take, it's my responsibility. I'm the only person. I'm in charge of the water department. I got to make this happen, and I'm committing to you that I will make this happen. So, and committing to the people too, because it needs to be done. We can't put it off anymore. The can's been kicked so far down the road. Some of the money was used elsewhere in the city, similar to wastewater, and the end of the road's there. We just can't kick the can anymore. We need to start kind of figure out what we're going to do with that can at this point, and we need to start, making these repairs so that people don't have this type of water. So,
my next concern is the plants and facilities.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of the information or money that we're spending now is going towards the delivery system, and 5 years from now, like we hear in wastewater all the time, is, well, we ignored the facility for the last 10 years. I mean, we had a brand-new facility, we ignored it for 10 years, and now we've got to make millions of dollars worth of improvements to the facilities. I mean, we've got 2 beautiful facilities.
Right.
Where is the budget plan also to maintain those beautiful facilities so that we don't end up having, I don't even remember how much we spent on the water purifiers for the brand-new facilities up on Narrows Road, but I mean, where in our capital improvement plans are we making sure that the facilities...
And that's something we do every day. We make sure that things are kept clean, that the equipment's maintained. We make sure that in the winter months when the roof is covered with snow, that it's cleaned off. The new plant on Ringe Road, we have a yearly inspection of the roof done by the people that put in the roof, because it has a 30-year span, and really rain getting in is like the worst thing. But that's on me to make sure that the people that I have working in the water department take care of those things. Some of these facilities, like the Narrows Road facility, I sent you one picture, it's gotten out of control. But when we bring that back, that's a good example, is that my idea is that to make these as maintenance-free as possible. A smaller building like that, rather than have a flat roof, we can do a pitched metal roof. You don't have to worry about snow build-up, and the new metal roofs are good for 100 years. You keep that roof over the building in good condition, that's going to protect the building. The flat roof is what has damaged the building over time. And some of the work, some of these older buildings have asbestos in, so we really can't do anything with them. They have to be done by a contractor, unfortunately. But no, I agree, and we do keep those up. And if there was something that I was concerned about, I would have brought it forward this meeting. We just need to keep up with taking care of those, making sure that, we don't have water leaks, make sure. And we do have problems with the furnaces there. The one at Regional Plant is 15 years old. The one at Ringe Road is 10 years old. And just like your house, there's things that go wrong. Circulator pump went, a burner needs to be replaced, things like that. So a little bit more expensive than at a house, but it's stuff that needs to be kept up. So.
And I do hear rusty water in some areas up Abbott Ave, Longwood.
Yeah.
I think bleeders have taken care of a lot of that
Yeah.
problem, but if that problem is as chronic as it is, find a solution.
Yeah.
Don't wait 2 years.
All right.
Okay, because otherwise, we should be paying for their dishwashers and their water purifiers and all of the things that they need to do because we can't do them. So find a solution for that area. Not that I'm saying anybody in my area shouldn't have a priority, but, I mean, that has got to be a priority for the city.
Yeah. We have spent a lot of time up there. I mean, I talk with Mr. Breton
Problems
regularly,
still
trying to
there.
figure out, we did a lot, and it's like I said, it is, I hate to say it again, but it is very frustrating to me, because like, usually we can figure out something to kind of mitigate it to some extent, and it's just, we haven't been successful.
And they've
so.
been very successful up in Abadab, along with all those areas that I have had problems with. They've been successful.
No, the last year, we've been able to make some headway, and we really look at the system and make sure that there isn't a valve that was closed and forgotten to close, and, you know, causing stagnant water, and, you know, and even having mixers in the tank. It doesn't sound like a big deal to prevent the ice formation, but even the mixers will help the water quality so that, you know, we have less tuberculation like this occur in the existing mains too, so.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor, or should I say Representative-elect Hay?
Real quick, I've just got 2 comments and 1 question, so I'll start with the question. Mike, earlier you said somewhere you talked about weight and rate and values that we have. Who makes those decisions?
It can be, you know, whoever wants to participate at that point. I mean, typically we work, obviously we work most closely with the water department, but it's a great way to engage the council if they, you know, when we do that.
Okay, I just wanted to find out. I didn't know if the mayor's office was involved in that or the
I would
council.
think the Water and Wastewater Commission would, you know, be involved in that. I wouldn't take it up on myself to do that. I mean, you know, we've got to balance out between, you know, water quality, fire protection too.
Well,
I mean,
because that's going to get to a couple of my points, my comments. First one is, I think this has been an excellent meeting. We got an awful lot of information, and we've got the mayor and city councilors talking about particular areas in this town that need to be addressed. There's short-term and long-term. Councilor Caddy should be commended for talking about Shea Street and seeing if we can put an above-ground pipe. You come up with another solution, talking about giving these people free water so that they can do the things that they're now paying for water at the supermarket for. That is ludicrous. The water's good, and by the time we get it to their homes, it's bad. That's not their fault. There should not be costs that's associated with that. So it's great that we're looking at that, and we're going to try to figure out something to resolve that. For me, a priority is the flow for fires that you talked about. You need to identify those, and those need to be at the top of the list, because, you know, bad water in your house is one thing, but the fire department not having the ability to put out a fire in your home is certainly something that's critical as far as I'm concerned, and that needs to be identified. And the last thing for me is that, like other councilors, I believe that residents are willing to accept a hike as long as there is a result that they get from that money being spent. And that's what we need to make sure that we do. And I think residents would prefer hikes that go a little bit at a time as opposed to a 68% one-time hike like we did on the wastewater a few years ago. But we need to make sure that we're saying this is what it's going to cost and this is what you're going to get, and then we need to deliver that. And that's the important part. And so not just the ultimate final result of the delivery, the process of the delivery needs to be explained, and they need to get a timetable, and they need to be kept up to date as to what's going on with the money that we're asking them to give to us to improve this system. So we need to come up with some type of way to communicate to residents, not just the council. Council's always asking for information. Well, that's nice to give it to us, but we got to make it available to the residents, whether it's online or they have ways of contacting you to find out where we stand in the project and in what the time frame is.
We try to do as much as we can through social media, like Facebook. We have that, and we can help that a bit just to keep status updates.
Okay,
on those, so.
just a comment.
So that's excellent, and we try to. I mean,
Yep.
I know some people cringe at the sound of Facebook, but we grab it, bull by its horns, and we deal with it. And you know, sometimes the comments aren't something we want to see, but we'll deal with it, and we'll talk to the people, and you know, try to keep them as well informed as possible. Because I mean, we want to make sure that people, you know, are understand that they're important and informed. You know.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add briefly, I just wanted to thank both of you, but but John, certainly, I know this is never easy coming in front of council and asking for this, but I know you spend a tremendous amount of work on behalf of the people of Fitchburg, making sure that we provide the most capable and best product possible to the residents, and I'm thankful for the efforts you put in here this evening. Also thankful to Lenny Laxo and his entire staff for working on this, not only on a daily basis, but for providing us this information. I'll echo the sentiments of Councilor Di Natale. This is among the most detailed information I've seen on any plan that we've had in this city, and particularly as it pertains to ongoing maintenance, as well as, what the actual costs associated. So I think I'm pleased that normally whenever we look at rate increases, first thing people want to do is place blame, and they want to look back and say, "Oh, was this person or this act or this event?" And I don't think we've done that this evening. And I think, sure, we could go back. Probably can't blame the people in 1880 who laid those pipes that are still working. That's pretty impressive. But certainly we can say, we've been deferring maintenance for decades. And kicking that bucket down the road. And the reality is we've underfunded the system, and at some point we have to stop being reactive. We have to actually map out the current problems and look ahead to what could come down the road. And I think any of us are interested in placing blame at this point, or looking back. We're interested in fixing the problem, making sure that we're providing adequate and safe fire protection systems, clean and sterile drinking water for the residents throughout the city. And I know we've talked a lot about Shea Street, and but I know there's others at home thinking, well, what about me? They've had water issues for for years or decades, just like the folks on Shea Street. So I think when we're talking about this, we're talking about all of the issues like Shea Street and all of the people that have been dealing with this for years. We can't address these problems unless we pay for it, and we're willing to pay for it and invest. And what I don't want is in 5 years or 10 years, the next neighborhoods on Longwood or Fitch Hill coming back and saying, well, we had a chance to address it, and how come now, we could have gotten this before the water turned orange, but now we're just waiting. So I think the only way to do this is to be proactive, and to, to actually start investing, to address, to mitigate, and to improve. So I know we always complain there is no plan in the city. I know I've said that numerous times since I've joined this body, but I'm pleased to say that it looks like you do have a solid plan to begin those efforts to improve. I know that this is still in many senses reactive, but this starts, even if it's a dent. We have a plan, we have a direction, and we know how to proceed. So I'll be in favor of this petition. I hope that residents understand that there will, in the long term, be a positive return on investment for these water rate increases. Councilor Beazall.
Thank you, and I want to echo Council President Kazmarek. You gave us a lot of information, a lot of emails, a lot of reading material. So I know some of the councils have brought up, like, it sounds like 10 years some of these people have been waiting for these issues to be addressed. Do you have a list that you can share with us of all the problem streets or the complaints that you get? Because what I'd like to do is, if we start with a list, so that we can actually say after 2 or 3 years or 4 years, well, the list was this long, and now we're down to this. And we can actually say for sure that people aren't waiting that long. I have to commend the residents. I'll be honest, I would not be as nice as they were tonight coming before us, that they've had to wait this long. So if we could kind of have that list, and we could just see the progress as we go along. The other thing, too, is I know that you're talking, we're adding bleeders, we're doing this. And if you could somehow give me an estimate of how much time we waste every year just trying to send people out to try to fix these problems that...
It is very time consuming. That's one of the reasons, that we have the staff we do, because we spend a lot of time not just fixing water main breaks or leaks in surface line, but trying to deal with water quality issues. So, and including a lot of my time too. So.
Okay. And a couple other questions I have is, so you're going to replace the new pipes. Is there going to be any damage to the pipes that haven't been fixed? Because now you're taking this large quantity of water and you're pushing it through a very small hole, left in the other pipes.
And a lot of the areas are dead-ended areas, so they're not, in the middle of a grid. Shea Street's a little bit different because it is in the middle. But for the most part, a lot of these areas that are problematic have been out at dead ends, and that's partially why they've been neglected. The 2 miles that were replaced as part of the sewer separation project, some of those streets never had a water quality complaint, but in the interest of trying to get all the streets, the infrastructure in the street done, Unitil would go in, do their stuff. The sewer was doing their work, separating the sewer from the stormwater and putting new drainage in. They looked at it and said, we're going to take those 2 miles and do those streets so that, the street gets paved, we're not back in digging it up. Unfortunately, like I said, those weren't some of the most problematic streets. They still need to be done. Some of them still look like this, but maybe not quite as bad. But in fact, we really need to redirect that, and that's what that list of mains I have. And I have a list. I'll send that out in the next week or so of all the problem streets that have to be basically programmed into this in the next couple of years. But we need to concentrate on these dead ends because they can't be neglected anymore. Because the majority, probably 80-90% of our dead-ended mains are in a street that's near to dead-ended. Bond goes up, and then there's View dead-ended. Haskell, it kind of circles back to Arlington, but effectively it's dead-ended. Those aren't going to have the problem because they're not in the middle of something. So, can it still stir things up? Yeah, it can, but it should stabilize fairly quickly, and the water quality will be much better. So.
And the last question I have is, so when you replace those, the pressure going to people's homes are going to be greatly increased. Will that affect their lines going from the street to the house?
It actually shouldn't be increased. What happens is that your pressure when your faucet's off, you say you have 80 pounds. When you turn that faucet on, you have 80 pounds. But think of this as a small service line or something like that. As the water flows through, it loses pressure because that energy from the water is used up trying to get through this rough-looking pipe. So in fact, their pressures won't change, but what they will see, instead of the pressure dropping off, it won't drop off. It'll stay the same. But somebody has 80 psi, we replace the pipe, they'll still have 80 psi because we still have a pressure zone that provides that water. So we shouldn't see that type of thing. However, if somebody has an iron pipe or something like that, typically we'll replace that as part of the water main project going up to the house, so that that'll be renewed too. So that we don't have, we get done the water main and they have to do something with their service, we'll do that as part of the work. And that's figured into that price too. A lot of them have new copper pipes or plastic pipes, we don't have to worry about those, but we do want to make sure that we don't, have an impact like that on a building or house.
All right, thank you.
Motion to grant 28-2016.
I have a motion and second to adopt 2816. Speaking to the motion, Councilor Joseph.
I guess my only other concern, and I know it hasn't been discussed yet, is the rate increase and the total amount of the increase at 17 cents going down to 8. Is that necessary? I know you said it's necessary to load the front end, but is it necessary to load the front end that heavy? Could you equalize it with a 13-10 as opposed to 17-8?
We could do that, but it might push off a little bit of the work. So that's.
But you have already retained earnings that you could start projects with, and.
Well, we're looking at borrowing quite a bit of money, so we need to have that money coming in. I'd have to talk to Dick about that. Whether we could still allow it, knowing that it would be a falling fiscal year, because I'll be back before you to borrow money for the work next year. So, and if we don't have those revenues in place, I know that's a good thing about and maybe it will work out, is that, when you borrow the money, the payments usually don't start to the year following. So, that is,
right.
something.
And the way it's always happened is you guys have had a boatload of retained earnings before projects start.
Yeah.
And then, you spend it all off, but we really need that boatload?
Having said that, we're looking at $9 to $10 million that we're looking at doing work. If we can get some of this money ahead, we're going to be able to pay for the project rather than borrow the money. So we'll be able to make the money go further. That's the downside to it. So.
You all set, Councilor Di Natale, speaking to the motion.
Just to address what Councilor Joseph's asking, because they're good questions. We have a fail-safe, we have a stopgap measure in this council. Every year when this gentleman comes before us for a budget, that is our authority, that is our time to level our authority at the department to ensure how much retained earnings is being used to subsidize a recurring budget? Retained earnings should never be used to operate a recurring budget. It should be there for one-time expenses, period. So I know President Kuchmarek said no blame should be laid out. We didn't do that today. I'm not doing that right now, but I'm saying, the council does have some stake in this in terms of we need to be diligent going forward, more so than we have been, when we see the next budget report. Because I said to Mr. DeLine last week in an email, I said to him, I better see a sizable loan pulled as soon as this is done. In 2 or 3 years, I don't want to see someone come before us and go, we need 4 people or the whole world's going to end. That's usually how it gets presented to us, so no matter where it is. So we need to make sure we stick to our guns. No new hires and no retained earnings reduction for recurring expenses, period. And I think that message has been received loud and clear. Because I'll tell you right now, if one of those 2 things occur, I won't be supporting that budget. In fact, I'll be cutting it. Of course, I'll probably get blamed for something that happens down the road that really didn't have anything to do with the cut, but be that as it may, I will do that. And everybody else should make a commitment to that too. This needs to go to the improvement of the quality of the system, more than anything else. If it doesn't, shame on us, and the residents will then have another 5 or 10 years worth of anger, justifiable, leveled at us because we didn't do our due diligence. Thank you.
Could I speak to that?
Very briefly, we have a motion and second on the floor. So
The budget that you'll see from me is going to show $100,000 in retained earnings, so that we can do $350,000 in the next year work, and that's why we have the 17%. And then the following year, and it was in the chart, shows us putting that back to $500,000 and then keeping it at $500,000 there out. So I don't want you to think that I'm not going to use any at all, but just to balance this year, and that's why we went for the 17%, so we wouldn't have to hit it anymore and not go much below $500,000, then keep it at $500,000 going out.
You're using it for the right reason this time. Last year, we used it to hire more people.
Yeah.
So that's where I have a problem with it. Thank you.
I have a motion and second on the floor to adopt. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It's unanimous.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.